Hello, everybody. So I should be front and center on your screens, is that correct? All right, welcome. Then I just need to do one other thing. All right. So I'm Dr. Justin Whitaker. I want to begin by saying welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for being here. I want to begin by acknowledging that I am speaking to you from Missoula, Montana, the Aboriginal territories of the Salish, Kootenai, and Kalispel people. Today, I ask that we honor the path that they and Indigenous people the world over have shown us in caring for this place for the generations to come. I want to begin also by welcoming you all to this conference, or as I prefer to call it, this conversation. And I do hope it will be just the beginning of a number of conversations that we will host and facilitate around the topic of the climate crisis. I want to begin also by thanking my colleagues at Buddhistdoor Global. Mr. Casey Lum, our editorial chief executive, laid forth the groundwork for this to happen and invited me to plant some seeds. Our technical team, headed up by our video editor, Alex Lung, and tech gurus, Ray Chow and Stanley Tung, who will be running videos from Hong Kong, all helped transform this from a mere idea into the current reality. My work began this spring with emails to John Negru of Sumeru Press and Venerable Yifa of the Woodenfish Foundation. John has lived an amazing life as an educator, author, Buddhist practitioner, and climate action organizer. He has been most prominently influential in my life after 2019, when he published his book, Bodhisattva 4.0, a primer for engaged Buddhists. Reading the work and passing it along to my colleagues at Buddhistdoor Global, I realized that a quick review would not do it justice. Excuse me. Instead, I asked John if we could adapt sections of it as feature articles for BDG. Thus began his column, Bodhisattva 4.0. I have touched on the climate crisis and connected issues. He's also sent me a copy of Michael Buckley's book, who you'll hear from later. The book is This Fragile Planet, discussing His Holiness the Dalai Lama's statements on the environment. And John and I have since discussed doing more with our respective media platforms to help shape change among Buddhists working on the environment. My other email went out to Venerable Yifa, with whom I have practiced and studied Chan Buddhism for over a decade. I was part of her first trip, bringing graduate students and professors to Holy Sun, once Chang'an, the ancient capital of China. In our practices and travels together, I've learned a great deal from Venerable Yifa, principally about the importance of discipline and living simply. As an instructor, immerses students in Chinese monastic life, complete with early mornings, Tai Chi, simple meals, simple clothes, classes on Dharma and history, tea, meditation, and sleep, repeated again and again until the process becomes natural and actually begins to feel freeing instead of a burden, as it does at the beginning. For the last year, at least, she and I have been discussing the idea of creating a conference on Buddhism and climate change. Both John and Yifa have kindly agreed to co-sponsor the conference with the Sumeru Press and the Woodenfish Foundation, respectively. John was also instrumental as a co-organizer of this conference, quickly seeing that my vague ideas and ambitions needed to be sharpened and honed quickly in order to pull this conference together in our ambitious timeline. So here we are. I'm very grateful, very, very grateful to be here and to see all of you here as well. I'm also very concerned about the state of the world. I've studied environmental ethics and ecological philosophy since around 2004, when it was clear that I would devote my education to Buddhism and philosophy. Some of the books I read back then that helped shape my understanding include Dharma Gaya, Dharma Reign, and Buddhism and Ecology. So these are all compilations of a number of texts and essays. So there's already a great deal of work in the field at that time. And even then, it was clear that we as a human race were on a terribly destructive path. But back then, there was still hope. There was hope that we could meaningfully cut CO2 and methane emissions in the years and decades ahead to curtail the crisis. I was inspired by the 2006 film by Al Gore, An Inconvenient Truth. It ends, as some of you may recall, with a rousing song by Melissa Etheridge and a list of things you can do to help solve the climate crisis. It literally says, solve the climate crisis. Many of the things on the list we might see as trite or consumeristic: lower the thermostat, buy a hybrid car. But some of the things on the list were more ambitious: writing Congress, even running for Congress, contacting local papers and radio stations, founding and working with community organizations devoted to a green future. It was all laid out for us. Many of us did make small steps. We bought the LED light bulbs in the Prius. We pledged to ride our bikes and use public transportation. We calculated our eco footprint and worked to reduce it. All the while, we watched global CO2 emissions levels rising and rising and rising. And while we also watched global leaders at summits propose ambitious plans, only to see them scaled back and only to see those often weak agreements forgotten and goals missed. And so here we are, 15 years after Al Gore's movie. The 2022 UN report on climate change, released this spring, urged global stakeholders that we must act, quote, now or never, to limit CO2 emissions. We have seen, quote, unprecedented flooding and storms and fires and droughts every year for the last 5 to 10 years, probably going back further. Gradually, however, they're increasing in regularity and intensity. We've transitioned from we have time to stop this crisis to, quote, now or never. And yet, I don't see global leaders launching bold new initiatives to fight climate change. That is frightening. Many climate scientists say we need to cut emissions by half by 2030. That's only 7.5 years away. And yet globally, we're still increasing emissions each year, with new coal-fired power plants being built in countries like China and India, and new oil and gas drilling leases being auctioned off in the United States, including around the delicate waters of the Gulf of Mexico. So there's much to be worried about. And yet, there's also much to be hopeful about. As we will see at this conference, Buddhist thought and practice can be part of the solution for us. As Buddhists, we understand that we are all interconnected. We also know that the greed, hatred, and ignorance that fuel so much waste and destruction in our world are also spiritual poisons that we must strive each day to overcome. We recognize our responsibility to reduce suffering everywhere, including that which is caused by our own consumption of resources. But we often don't know exactly where to start or what to do next. In this conference, we will hear from an amazing array of true Dharma and eco leaders. Each of them is working to confront the climate crisis in their lives, in their centers, in their regions, and beyond. Today's speakers, who include John Negru, embody that aspect of the Dharma which demands that we engage with the world. Tomorrow, we'll hear more from those Buddhists looking deeply at the Dharma in our personal lives as we confront the reality ahead of us. These two directions or spheres, what one might call horizontal and vertical, are not exclusive. We need periods of deep practice, not only for our spiritual growth, but for our psychological well-being and for our ability to continue on with what is at times extremely difficult and disheartening work. What I hope we'll see at this conference is that there is no one solution. Certainly there is no easy one, or our political leaders would have already done it. But what we will find are a variety of ways, 84,000 eco-dharma doors, if you will, to enter into the work of mitigating and stopping the climate crisis, which is already unfolding before our eyes. As I think should be clear, things will get worse before they get better. In the years to come, we can expect more devastating and unprecedented weather that will kill more people and destroy more homes and ecosystems. As that happens, we will also see more and more people waking up to the fact that change must happen. And again, there will be many ways to be part of that change. This conference aims to be the beginning of ongoing discussions and actions on the parts of presenters and participants. Follow-up conferences will track progress, obstacles, achievements that we together have as we confront humanity's most pressing issue. What happens next is very much up to you individually and collectively. Let us hope that we can be welcoming vessels for the wisdom before us, and that it will fill us and ripple onward into the world. With gratitude to my ancestors, my teachers, my colleagues, to all of our presenters, and most of all to you, our audience. Finally, when Venerable Ananda said to the Buddha that admirable friendship is half of the holy life, the Buddha rebuked him by saying, "No, Ananda, don't say that. Admirable friendship is actually the whole of the holy life. When a monk has admirable people as friends, companions, and comrades, he can be expected to develop and pursue the Noble Eightfold Path. Today, admirable friendship can be said to include a deep concern for our planet and an understanding of human-caused climate change. With that, friends, we will take a short break and return to at the top of our hour for our first two presenters.
My name is Gabriel Durham, and I'm very excited to be speaking at this conference virtually today. I was invited by some of my friends from the Woodenfish Foundation and some other scholars of mine to share some perspectives today from not only my connection to the Buddhist community and philosophy in general, but also my now decade of experience in the sustainability industry, where I've worked for the University of Houston, the city of Houston. I've also done research in Georgia about environmental triggers of health disparities and all these kinds of things. And the reason why I wanted to come and talk today is because after working in the sustainability industry for as long as I have, while meditating most of my life and studying Buddhist philosophy, I've realized that there's a lot of overlap between the two about escaping these cycles of rebirth and samsara and escaping our extractive, economic, dirty systems. And so I wanted to talk today about that overlap because I find it to be very constructive in giving people advice on how to move in this world that we find ourselves, how to do mindful activism and work. And in order to make that kind of digestible and approachable, I thought a good model would be to look at the Eightfold Path as a kind of parallel structure for the sustainability movement that we find ourselves in, with a particular focus on right livelihood, which I'll get to in the middle of this talk. So we only have 15, 20 minutes together, so I guess I'm going to go ahead and jump right in and pepper in some of my sustainability experience while we work through this kind of talk today. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope you can get something from this. So starting off with the Eightfold Path, which is pretty introductory for a lot of Buddhist folks. It's in kind of Buddhism 101 courses. It's one of the first things you'll find on Wikipedia if you look into Buddhist philosophy and teachings. This Eightfold Path is a set of pretty specific instructions from Buddhism on how to kind of cultivate the lifestyle that a Buddhist is after, how to work towards proper transcendence, and maybe even if we're lucky, enlightenment. A lot of these are in there. So it's not really a hierarchical system. It's not like it goes from right view progressively up to right jhana or right transcendence, but I'm going to present it that way today just because it fits well with the sustainability movement. But I hope you'll see that these all complement each other as they're supposed to. It's not kind of one before the other. They're all equally important. But today I wanted to start with the first one in my list, which is right view. So right view is a really good place to start on this whole Dharma wheel, because the right view is kind of when you start to say, hey, something is off here. So in sustainability, that's one thing, but in Buddhism, it's very specific. It talks about awareness of cause and effect. It talks about awareness of karma, the consequences of our actions, and essentially the moment when we start to look at the world as something that is workable and path walkable, as opposed to this completely stuck place we find ourselves in. So again, with Buddhism, that's when we start to say, hey, maybe I could get enlightened. Maybe I can see that there's something wrong here that can be improved upon or better understood. So in sustainability, I think this is kind of the beginning for a lot of people, in that we look around at our economic systems and we see what's going on in the world, and all of a sudden we say, hey, there's something wrong here. And this pops up variously throughout history. You see monks and even lay people talking about this moment where they realize human beings are abusing their environment. There's something going on here, whether it's cyanide fishing or eroding the tops of mountains for mines. Throughout history, from the beginning of it, you can find people who say there's something about human behavior in our environment that is abusive, and that if taken to a larger scale could become very dangerous, which is where we find ourselves now. So in sustainability, I kind of see this as the 1960s and 1970s, when people were first starting to wake up as a global scale to plastic pollution and emissions from factories and these kinds of things. So in sustainability, this right view is, hey, these systems are really dirty and we invented them in the first place, so maybe we can start to change them. So that right view, I think, is a great place to start, because that's where a lot of people already are at. We all know that there's work that needs to be done. So what comes next? The next thing I see is then the right resolve. And right resolve in Buddhism is usually a very renunciation focusing aspect. I'm going to escape samsara, or I'm going to awaken in this lifetime. It has to do with the effort we put forth to our practice to know that this is going to take a lot of work, and we have the right mindset to know that this is something we have to do, we must do, and are prepared to do. So in sustainability, just think climate change targets. Just think about all of the different Paris Climate Accords that we've set where, okay, we've seen there's something wrong with these systems. We've seen how there's something that is wrong, but what actions do we set in motion to do? What is our goal here? What is our focus? And so for sustainability, we see this all the time in reduction goals, campaigns, all these things that say this is the kind of stuff we need to do to solve climate change. Let's all rally together and do it. And I think all of us have gotten that message fairly well as well. But that brings us into this whole right speech thing, which comes next. Because what is right speech? So in Buddhism, right speech is very specific. Again, you might notice a very interpersonal focus with this thing that we call right speech, right view. It's very inside of like who we are and how we're relating to the world. And the same is true with this right speech idea of no lying, no rude speech, no sowing discontent, talking about people when you know it's going to upset them. Very interpersonal focus. And again, the idea is to start looking at how you talk to people as an impact of your karma and your awareness and your cultivation of this whole path that we're trying to walk. So in sustainability, it's very similar, but it's again less interpersonal and more about the way that we're looking at how we're going to achieve these right conduct goals that we keep talking about and right effort goals that we keep talking about. So in right speech, a great example in sustainability is the word organic, right? what does organic even mean? Organic to a chemist means something very different than organic to a farmer. And getting that definition right is pivotal when you're talking about sustainability with people, because if you don't get it right, it can often cause a lot of nitpicking. Well, they say this and they really mean this. And look at these people who say they're setting climate goals, but they don't even know what organic really means. It's all organic, even oil's organic. So right speech is actually quite important in sustainability. And so I encourage you all to think about this part of it. How are you talking to people about it? Another example is global warming used to be a term that was thrown around a lot, but the world isn't just warming up, it's extreme weather, which is why we now call it climate change. So even though Buddhism, it's mostly about this, things about no lying, no sowing discontent, if I was a sustainability monk, I would say things like no global warming, because that just sows discontent with the people who are here to be naysayers, and it causes further complication, which then complicates the next piece, which is right conduct. Again, in Buddhism, this is very specific. No killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, very focused on how your interpersonal world is and how that relates with others around you, with very clear instructions on how to cultivate the right conduct to get you into this place for good karma and transcendence and all that stuff. And again, very similar to sustainability, right? Because in sustainability, it's all about what are we doing with our stuff? How are we behaving in the world? How much are we driving? How much are we recycling? How do we garden? These kinds of things. Right conduct is pivotal in sustainability. And I think a lot of us have been doing very well in that. I've worked in sustainability so long. I've seen the transition from monoculture lawns to better pollinator gardens, right? That's right conduct. We're getting habitat provided. We're fighting soil erosion and these kinds of things. But it has a deeper, sinister thing here. I'm going to linger for a second on right conduct, because for the last about 3 or 4 decades, right conduct has been sold to us as our problem, right? Think about the Crying Indian campaign that they had for Keep America Beautiful. They see the wrapper that goes out the window of the car, and there's this Indian who looks at the camera and he sheds a single tear to create this narrative that it's all our fault, that we have all this plastic everywhere, that we have all these papers everywhere. But fun fact, Keep America Beautiful, and that ad itself was paid for by the Coca-Cola company and Frito-Lay. So that was the offsourcing of their bad conduct then onto us, saying we need to change, we as citizens need to do this. But if you look around, a lot of us are doing a really good job. We've cut our plastic bag use, we're using our single-use water bottles, and all these things. Our conduct is finally right, but it keeps on getting stuck somehow. We keep on finding that it's still, the trash still shows up, the soil is still being eroded. So what is going on here? And I think that's what brings me to my main point, which is this thing we call right livelihood. So what is really livelihood? Livelihood is the way that we stay alive, right? Livelihood is how we pay the bills. Livelihood is how we keep the lights on. Livelihood is how we feed our children. A very integral part of what it means to be a human being, livelihood is. And in Buddhism, they acknowledge that, and knowing that if you had the wrong livelihood, it could be very difficult to find any type of transcendence or peace, because they say no trading of weapons, because if you're generating violence in the world, how can you be a nonviolent person? No human trafficking, no selling of human bodies, no selling of drugs or intoxicants or things like that. Because if you've taken these, again, right conduct vows we've talked about before, that conduct starts to show up in your livelihood. But in the world we find ourselves today, that seems to be somewhat separate from us as far as our agency and our choice. So we find ourselves doing all the stuff at home. Let's imagine a perfect scenario. You've got a garden at home that you get all your vegetables from, and it's all with rainwater. And you've got all these wonderful pollinator beds all around, and you keep your thermostat minimally used. And then the minute you have to go to your livelihood, you got to get in a car, especially if you live in Houston like I do. And you have to drive and emit all these emissions. And then you get to the conference room with all the board members, and they all have to have a very specific coffee cup. And you have to make sure to order those coffee cups and print 100-page memos. And then you find out that your entire salary and a bunch of your company is invested in oil. And a lot of that money that's coming from them is their oil investments. And you find yourself saying, my goodness, I didn't make any of these choices, but this is my livelihood. And you have to ask the hard questions of how can I then change my livelihood to be more sustainable? In the same way these early Buddhists had to ask the question, how can I change my livelihood to be more of a Buddhist? It's very similar and also very, very difficult, because we're talking about life, bread, electricity, children, the things that we do to keep that all together. And what is industry right now but collective livelihood? And that collective livelihood is where all the red flags are being thrown out. You know, we talk about sustainability today and we find out that 80% of all the global pollution is coming from the commercial sector, not from our individual homes. We find out most of the pollution and also the plastic is coming from that same place. Just look at COVID. When COVID hit, all of a sudden medicinal plastic had to be everywhere. All the zero waste eateries that you could go to all of a sudden had to use shrink wrapped plastic utensils. All these choices that none of us made because of the collective livelihood and industry that is the medicine industry. So we seem as a culture and as a collective to be stuck at this idea. We've got the right speech. We know how to talk to our senators. We know how to say that climate change is real. We know how to conduct ourselves amongst ourselves with reusable water bottles and drainage gardens and all these things. But the moment we hit this thing that we're aspiring to called right livelihood is where it all seems to shut down. And so another thing about that is that it comes up into right effort. And this is the next piece of the talk of how, okay, we've got this messed up livelihood. What efforts can we make to change that? Because if it's this collective thing, it's not a single person's decision, and it's not also the collective's decision. It's kind of a non-dual thing, which again is a very Buddhist idea. And so I think it's important to then start looking to the future. We've got still left to talk about today, right effort, right mindfulness, and right samadhi. And so these three pieces I see as the future of sustainability and the places where we can really start to think about, okay, where can this livelihood thing that seems to be so dirty start to get cleaned up? So first example is our right effort. So in Buddhism, again, bringing it back to the historical context, it talks about restraint. It talks about meditation and sustaining practice. In short, it's not over until it's over. You can't just meditate at a retreat for a couple of weeks and expect to be enlightened and keep going. There's a famous Zen saying of before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. So before the Clean Air and Water Act, clean up the air and water. After the Clean Air and Water Act, clean up the air and water. Very similar. And a good historical example of that is, in fact, our Clean Air and Water Act, which was passed in the 1970s, believe it or not, by a Bush administration, which is pretty amazing to think about. And so I think it's important as a sustainability professional to shed a bit of light on that Clean Air and Water Act required that there was no idling of 18-wheeler trucks. In the 70s, it said that there was going to be no more idling. Have you ever seen that policed anywhere? No. I've actually had to write Clean Air and Water Acts for Houston and also for the university I worked for. And I was told specifically that I could write the policy, but it was unpoliceable because of the amount of trucks all over. And because what are we going to do? We're going to go see somebody idling and wag our finger at them and yell at them. That's not right speech. So you see how these start to come together, because if I then go and decide to talk to this poor truck driver and wag my finger at him and make him feel so mad, that's not good conduct either. And it's going to cause him to be stressed out, me to be stressed out, both of us to be pretty upset with each other. And it sows discontent, just like right speech was talking about. So what is right effort in that scenario? Is it to go and talk to his supervisor? Is it to go and campaign in Washington to actually enforce this Air and Water Act that clearly they don't have the ability to do so? It's very confounding, but as a minimalist and as we talk about skillful means in Buddhism as well, what if that truck idling didn't have an environmental footprint to begin with? That's a whole new idea. So now we're starting to show up with zero emission cars and different types of things like that that take away that human perspective, because guess what? Humans are humans. My anthropology degree helped me see that we've been humans forever. And it helps us think a little bit more skillfully with our means about where to apply our effort and our time to fight this climate crisis. And it's not just yelling at each other. It's about policy and innovation and helping each other through this more properly applied effort. So next is right mindfulness. And right mindfulness is a pretty fascinating one to think about from a sustainability perspective. In Buddhism, this talks a lot about right meditation. It talks about, not daydreaming and sleeping all the time on your cushion and calling it transcendence. It's proper middle way awareness, cultivation of single point focus. In other certain types of Buddhism, this is prajna that we're cultivating through right mindfulness, as opposed to, again, just kind of like blah, like we could do anywhere else. So what does that mean in sustainability? It's actually what I'm trying to illuminate today. It's the very thing I'm trying to illuminate with this talk. So right mindfulness is how we engage in our right livelihood. It's how we pick our battles. It's how we look at what we're doing and value what's good about it. For example, being unmindful would just be saying that, oh, it's all horrible because that's what I hear on the news all the time, and this is clearly what I'm being told, and it's not doing any good. But right mindfulness is going into my garden and seeing how much taller my native plants have gotten. It's going and seeing the water leave my garden clearer than other people's gardens, or the drainage to be better. It's to be aware that these things take time and these things are happening, especially on a local scale, and to then use that energy to take you a bit further, as opposed to just feeling like it's all stuck and you're in this bad position and you're just daydreaming through it all and you've surrendered to it. No, right mindfulness is knowing that this is something we're cultivating, and it's something that does have impact so long as you can have the clarity to see it. Which brings, of course, to the conclusion of this, which is right samadhi, or right transcendence, or right dhyana, depending on the type of Buddhism we're talking about. They slightly different languages call it slightly different things. I'd love to say that right samadhi in sustainability is like Star Trek, right? Because, oh, yes, we've gone past all of these extractive systems and we still are people and we still have interpersonal conflict, but there's no more money and people can change livelihoods into good, wholesome livelihoods with skillful means and all that wonderful stuff. But that's too far in the future for today. So today, I think right samadhi, in the experience that we're going through right now, this transition that we're going through right now, is realizing that it's okay to rest. I call this radical rest. This came to me through Dzogchen perspectives and Zen perspectives, the kind that where you go and you're already complete. The idea is that there's nothing to do here. Because frankly, I have argued so much about conventional agriculture and organic agriculture, because that is a very important fight in sustainability. And you can have hour-long, day-long conversations about the benefits of both, believe it or not. Organic, as much as we love to think it's wonderful, is actually way more intensive on water and on land than conventional agriculture. So a lot of the deforestation going on around the world is because, I hate to say it, organic agriculture. And that's a challenge, right? Also, it uses way more water than conventional agriculture. Of course, we know the perils of conventional agriculture, from problems with our water tables to the animals themselves suffering quite a bit. So the way I sum it up is that organic agriculture is good for you, it's good for the animals, it's good for the plants, but it's not good for the planet. Conventional agriculture, terrible for our water, terrible for the planet, terrible for the animals, but it's actually fairly good at conserving water and conserving land to protect natural spaces. So the wild planet is actually safer with conventional agriculture. And it's enough to make you pull your hair out, because no one can ever be right about this argument. And that means that the right samadhi, to me, the transcendence, the ability to kind of nirvanize this whole argument, is that, you know what has the lowest carbon footprint of all? Meditation. And fasting, less. If you can have less agriculture in one way or the other, whether that's better self-control with your diet or less wasted food or any of these kinds of things, the answer is actually less, which to me is a great blessing of these teachings. So that's it for my 20 minutes. I hope that this wasn't too much information, but I'll be here for a panel at the end to discuss more of this and its relationship to my work in sustainability. So thank you so much for having me today, and I hope to see you more in the conference.
Hello everyone, it is Dipen Barua, University of Hong Kong. It is a great honor for me to be here to present in this online conference, Buddhist Voices in the Climate Crisis. Let me express my sincere gratitude to the Buddhistdoor Global, Sumeru Books, and the Woodenfish Foundation for inviting me for this presentation. The title of my presentation is Green Buddhism, a Buddhist approach to global environmental and ecological balance. The content of my presentation is Duamese tribe's strong connection to the earth United Nations efforts to protect the environment, the concept of ecology, eco-Buddhism or Buddhist ecology, the eco-monks, dependent co-arising and modern ecological concepts, Emperor Asuka's ecological ethics, ecological imbalance in modern era, and concluding remarks. Let me begin my presentation with a letter. Actually, this letter is issued by the Buddhist tribes leader, who did have a very strong connection to the earth. In 1855, sent a letter to Franklin Pierce, President of the United States, who wanted to purchase the Duamish lands in the northeast of the US, which are now in Washington State. The letter was sent to President Pierce in response to his proposal. Some excerpts from the letter are mentioned here. These quotations, or these three excerpts from the letter. It says, every part of the earth is sacred to my people. Every shining pine needle, every sandy shore, every mist in the dark woods, every meadow, every humming insect, all are holy in the memory and experience of my life, experience of my people. The rivers are our brothers. They quench our thirst. They carry our canoes and feed our children. So you must give the rivers the kindness that you'd give any brother. This we know, the earth does not belong, man belongs to the earth. All things are connected like the blood that united us all. This last sentence actually is very important for my presentation. It is because, as the sentence says, all things are connected like the blood that unites us all. All things are connected. Soil, earth, water, even river, all these are connected. So Buddhism also says that all these are interconnected, interdependence. The world, the environment is interconnected, interdependence. So this is the main theme of my presentation. So from the letter, it shows that the Native Americans had a strong connection to the earth. They didn't understand the concept of property. They didn't say that this earth is their own property. Rather, they believed that the earth to own humankind. Global warming is an important issue facing mankind. Today's mankind, how this is, they're facing this global warming. Due to climate change caused by global warming, this earth is now facing the threat of extreme and unprecedented natural disasters. In today's world, the ecological balance is being disturbed due to the reckless, short-sighted, and irreversible activities of mankind. Global warming in particular is threatening the stability of the natural environment. As a result, global warming has become a threat to mankind. This is the continuation of the previous slide. As you see here, all the rich and poor countries of the world have become more or less terrified because of the climate change. Because the climate change caused by global warming will not only disturb the normal way of life of mankind, there is a possibility of extinction of a large number of people in the world. As a result of global warming, not only mankind is facing destruction, but the existence of numerous plants and animals is also endangered. The United Nations efforts to protect the environment. As we know, that United Nations has taken a number of steps to protect the environment, to reduce the global warming, and many things as we see here. Various efforts are being undertaken by the United Nations to protect the environment and bring the ecosystem back into dynamic balance. For example, the creation of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was established in 1988, the Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit in Brazil, the Kyoto Climate Change Conference in Japan, the Bali Climate Conference in Indonesia, the Copenhagen Climate Conference in Denmark, the 2021 United Nations Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, etc. So these all are the conferences mostly taken place in different countries and organized by the United Nations to address the issue of climate change. Various countries taken extraordinary steps. Even apart from the United Nations, many other countries have also taken some steps, so are called extraordinary steps. What are the steps? As we see here, the Maldives government on October 20th, 2009, they organized a meeting at the bottom of the sea, all right? And the cabinet meeting at the top of Mount Everest by the Nepal government on December 8, 2009. So these have some extraordinary steps taken by various countries, all right, to address the issue of global warming or climate change. So now come to the concept of ecology. Ecology. How do you understand the ecology? The ecology, German biologist Ernst Haeckel in 1869 and scientist Tanzler in 1935, respectively, used the term ecology or ecosystem for the first time. The concept of ecology is that an organism cannot survive without the help of other organisms and the environment. If regulatory conditions such as light, air, water, temperature, climate, weather, food, etc. exist in a certain order through the interdependence of organisms with organisms with the environment, then an ecological balance is established in the living world. If there is imbalance condition in the ecosystem, natural disasters occur. The existence of the living world is in jeopardy. Let's come to eco-Buddhism or Buddhist ecology. Ecology and Buddhist ecology, all right? So this is, of course, a kind of unique term we are using in the world in current time today. So what is Buddhist ecology, or why Buddhism is so-called eco-Buddhism or eco-friendly Buddhism? Why? Because by learning from the life and teachings of the Buddha, many environmentalists throughout the world have launched a movement called eco-Buddhism or Buddhist ecology to protect the planet, nature, environment, and human society from climate change. It is known from the life history of the Buddha that Buddha loved nature and forest very much. The significant events of the Buddha's life took place in nature, the forest. For example, Siddhartha Gautama was born in a garden in Lumbini, attended Buddhahood in Uruvela forest in Bodh Gaya. After attaining Buddhahood, he gave his first sermon in the forest of Meghalaya in Sarnath. He attained Mahaparinibbana at the age of 80 under the Shala tree in Kushinagar. And for 45 years after attaining Buddhahood, all the Viharas from which he preached his Dhamma were located in forest or away from the locality. The importance of forest in Buddhism. The importance of forest has been recognized in Buddhist texts, such as the Sutta Pitaka, the Vinaya Pitaka, the Dhammapada, the Theragata, the Therigata, the Jataka, etc. Even in the Pachatya text of the Vinaya Pitaka, it is mentioned that cutting of plants and burns is a Pachitya offense for monks and nuns. During the rainy season, the Buddha asked the monks who wandered in the remote areas of the forest to stay in the monastery for minimum 3 months, of course, for a period of time. It is mentioned in the Petavattu that it is a treacherous act to break the branches of a tree that provides a place to sit, sleep, and shade. The Buddha realized the need for close harmony with humans, animals, and planets. So Buddhism is an eco-friendly religion. Because of all these things in text, as you find that Buddha realized the need for close harmony with humans, animals, and plants, so that Buddhism is called an eco-friendly religion. Deforestation is a major threat. Deforestation, particularly I will talk about this forestation in some Buddhist countries, in Thailand and Cambodia. So deforestation is a major threat in these 2 countries. According to a World Bank report, 73% of Cambodia was covered by forest in 1990. But by 2010, that had fallen to 57%. Decades of illegal logging has had an adverse effect on local economics, food security, and biodiversity. However, a group of Buddhist monks and activists in Thailand and Cambodia are working together to protect threatened forest, integrating Buddhist principles with environmental awareness, providing consultation to government officials about environmental issues, and implementing sustainability projects. They are also involved in tree ordination, which over the first few years has gained media attention around the world for its innovative and inspiring messages about the sanctity of the natural world. The eco-monks, the monks who were actually fighting in Cambodia and in Thailand to protect environment. So they are known to be eco-monks. So these eco-monks insist that they simply want to promote awareness of dependent co-arising, as taught by the Buddha. All things exist through complex causes and conditions, which in turn become the causes and conditions for other phenomena. From this perspective, the world is a vast web of interdependence in which human and environmental well-being are inseparable. This is the ultimate objective of the eco-monks. The ultimate objective is to protect the forest and trees for the well-being of the environment, while also eliminating mental defilements and relieving human suffering. So this is the main agenda for these eco-monks who are, fighting to protect the environment of Thailand and Cambodia. Dependent co-arising and modern ecological concepts. How dependent co-arising principles we can apply to protect our, environment. So this is one of the, my proposal, all right, from the perspective of Buddhism. Mentioning the principle of the dependent co-arising, we can say that nothing in the world is independent. Everything is conditioned. Everything is dependent on each other. Just as there is interdependence between nature and mankind, there is also interdependence between mankind and animals. No one can live alone or in isolation. Balanced progress is not possible, excluding anyone or anything. That is, mankind, animals, planet, soil, light, air, water, etc. are dependent on each other. In the dependent co-arising, we see reflections of modern ecological concepts. Therefore, Buddhism is called eco-Buddhism by many environmentalists. Now let's come to Emperor Asoka's ecological ethics. I'll read two major rock edicts, sorry, that issued or laid down by Emperor Asoka. Emperor Asoka understood the ecological ethics of Buddhism, so he laid emphasis on environment conservation in his major rock edicts. For example, I'll read these two rock edicts, number 1 and number 2. As the rock edict says, here no living being must be killed and sacrificed. Formerly in the kitchen of King Devanama Priyadarshini, many hundred thousands of animals were killed daily for the sake of curry. But now, when this script on morality is caused to be written, then only 3 animals are being killed daily, 2 peacocks and 1 deer. But even these deer not regularly. But even these 3 animals means these 2 peacocks and 1 deer shall not be killed in future. The second rock edict says, everywhere 2 kinds of medical men were established by King Devanama Priyadarshini. Medical treatment for man, medical treatment for cattle. Whatever there were no herbs beneficial to man and beneficial to cattle, everywhere they were caused to be imported and to be planted. Likewise, wherever there were no roots and fruits, everywhere there were caused to be imported and to be planted. On the roads, trees were planted and wells were caused to be dug for the use of cattle and man. So these rock edicts actually rescripted by Emperor Asoka. We can see in his rock edicts that he followed the ecological ethics of Buddhism. Ecological imbalance in modern era. Environmental pollution is occurring due to rapid industrialization in the modern era, due to excessive greed, excessive profit, and excessive consumption, and ecological imbalance is occurring. If the mind is not free from greed, hatred, and delusion, these greed, hatred, and delusion are called poisons or fire. In Buddhist text, they are defilements, of course, and these 3 things actually pollute our mind. So whose mind is full of greed, hatred, and delusion? Many countries will not reduce carbon dioxide emissions due to personal interest and national interest. And environmental pollution will continue. As a result, no lasting solution can be found. So because of that, though United Nations are undertaking many steps to stop the global warming or environmental pollution. But of course, because of our greedy mind, greedy mentality all over the world, so is no lasting solution we can find, right? So because of that, I conclude my presentation with these concluding remarks. What are the concluding remarks? Mainly 3 things. Number 1, today's environmentalist can follow the Buddha's life, teachings to lead a movement against environmental pollution, as followed by Emperor Asoka. Emperor Asoka means we can see these 2 rock edicts here, particularly the second rock edicts. He has given full freedom or a kind of care to human beings and other animals as well. And he even planted trees everywhere where trees were not available. So we can follow this method to protect our environment. They can be inspired by Buddha's teachings of life and let life. They can remain those environmentalists who are working for climate change or global warming or to protect environment. They can be inspired by Buddha's teaching of live and let live. Live and let live means for the sake of owns one, living, and also you have to give chance to others to live, right? And dedicate themselves to building a green world, so-called green world, to protect the ecological and ecological balance of the world. Number 3, in the light of green Buddhism, they can accept the creation of a habitable green earth for future generations as one's environmental responsibility. This is our responsibility to protect our environment, individual's responsibility, all right? So we can inspire from the Buddha's life, his teachings, and his teaching that lead to, the issue of environmental things, right? So we can inspire from Buddha's life and Buddha's teaching. Finally, I conclude my presentation with a statement by His Holiness Dalai Lama. His statement is on natural environment. He says, I believe that not only should we keep our relationship with our fellow human beings very gentle and non-violent, but it is also very important to extend that kind of attitude to the natural environment. So this is the statement given by His Holiness Dalai Lama. So we can also see people who are working for the betterment of the world. These people are also, encouraging people to protect our natural world. So with this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much for your kind attention. And yeah, thanks to everyone.
All right, so I'll be unmuting our speakers, and so I'm requesting that they unmute. All right, we have Gabriel now and Deepan Bara. Thank you both so much for being here and the presentations.
Thank you for having me and us.
Glad to have you. Hi, Deepan. Can we hear you? You're still muted. Yeah. Oh, there we go.
Hey. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you both very much. So we have a question coming in from John Negru. Let's see, the first one was for Gabriel, and he asks if you can tease out the connection between sustainability and regenerative design.
Yeah, that's I love that people are already talking about regenerative design here, because that's kind of right at the forefront of how I think. So the connection there is incredibly biological in my perspective, particularly in regenerative agriculture. So for example, there's a pyramid I could show from a different paper I've written about soil topography and how many microorganisms in the soil are required to support just one hawk, for example, because these microorganisms are what puts nutrients into soil, what are called humates. They make dirt into soil. So the difference there is dirt, you can't grow anything out of. It's an innate mineral thing, while soil is full of biological activity, teeming with the stuff. And that biological activity moves water, nutrients, roots, structures, all these kinds of things. And traditional agriculture, and even sometimes organic agriculture, pull so much resources out of the soil that you end up with these kind of mass extinctions going on. It also happens because of the pesticides and fungicides we use in agriculture, and then even in our front lawns, as a matter of fact. And that is causing an extinction below soil that is actually far more extreme than the birds we're losing in the Gulf of Mexico, than the rare tigers and things like that. That's what hits the news. But the most alarming mass extinction going on right now is in our soils. So what regenerative design does is it finds a way to get nutrients and things back into the soil, to then get that all regenerated back to fertile growth, all these kinds of things, to then have better tree growth, because we can't grow more trees to clean the air if we don't have good soil. So then same goes for the way you build buildings, because regenerative design is not just agriculture. It's also buildings that capture carbon from the atmosphere, for example, and then condense that carbon into fuel that can then be used to, say, burn to the generators or something like that. So they're actively pulling carbon out of the atmosphere to regenerate the quality of our air and also run our buildings. So this is where you hear the terms like carbon negative. are these kinds of things where we're not just cutting emissions, but we're actually pulling things out of the air in addition to those cuts. So it's kind of like a 1-2 punch to help us catch up in the ways that we've fallen behind while providing better environment. So that's a big concept, but I hope that that shows the connection. The more we regenerate our spaces and our places, the more they will help us in our fight to clean the world.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much, Gabriel. It reminds me of what Sarah Beasley's been writing about for us at Buddhistdoor Global a bit. And just to give a plug for a film she wrote a little bit about called Kiss the Ground, which had a lot of kind of the science and an actual farmer who did some of this moving away from conventional tilling of the soil to no-till. And there's things you can do in your backyard, just laying down cardboard and letting things grow through that really encourage microbial life and worms and insects, all to do a lot of the work that tilling would do for you. You know, they break up the soil and create new nutrients. And I'm not an expert on this at all, but I kind of hope that we're on the verge of kind of a shift toward a less intensive form of agriculture that preserves life in the ground, as you mentioned, that being a major loss of life. So that's very exciting. Thank you, Gabriel.
Big fan of Kiss the Ground. I didn't know we were connected there. So yeah, 2 thumbs up to Kiss the Ground. Now, since I know she's here. Thank you. Thank you.
Fantastic. And yeah, thank you, Sarah, for writing about that and kind of introducing me and our readers to that. I hope more people can learn about that. Question for Deepan from let's see, Alex Kakuyo. What texts or sutras would you suggest for people who want to learn about Buddha's teachings on ecology? Any come out, stand out to you?
All right. Good morning from Hong Kong. It's very early morning here. I had to wake up around 5:30 early in the morning. So I hope you have enjoyed my presentation. So actually, I was COVID positive recently, and I just recovered. So I'm sorry for that. I didn't have much time to prepare all the things very nicely. And I mean, you can see I was a little bit coughing while I'm giving my presentation. So, all right. So thank you for the question. As it is said that what is the exact Buddhist text or sutras that I can recommend to, read about the Buddhist, ecology or ecology from the Buddhist perspective. Of course, there is no a specific text mentioned about the ecology or so-called Buddhist ecology, but through reading several suttas or texts, you can see that, yeah, these are the passages or discourses that we can talk about that Buddhist ecology or ecological perspective. As I mentioned, even particularly, I very much inspired through the Theragatha and Therigatha, these 2 texts, this Theragatha and Therigatha, particularly monks and nuns, how they appreciate the, environment while they were meditating. Even in the Vinaya text, the Buddha mostly highlighted that particularly monks, according to the Theravada Vinayas, monks or nuns are not allowed to pick even, even any kind of plants, So it's if any monk or nuns they pluck any kind of plant or even a small leaf, it is a kind of pachitya offense for them. So all these things, when we gather together, actually, we can see that, yeah, Buddhism in that context, we can see many things talked about ecology, environment, etc. So I can't exactly say a specific sutta or text, but by reading suttas and other texts, many people have gathered or composed many books, even articles. I think even Venerable Bhikkhu Analayo has published a book. I don't have exact right now. It is at my office. So you can, I think, read all these texts and books and published by, many scholars and also monks. Yeah. So I think we can, by reading these kind of things, we can understand the, Buddha's teachings on ecology. Thank you, Alex, for the question. Shall I address the second question, Justin? All right.
Sure. Can you read it out loud?
All right.
I'll read it if you'd like.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah. John
Yeah,
Negru asked in
yes.
your concluding remarks, you talk about environmental responsibility. Commitment and vows are difficult to awaken. How might we do that? This is from John Negru. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, John. Thank you very much. So in your concluded remarks, you talk about environmental responsibility. I think it's there. As I mentioned in my presentation, that live and let live. All right. So live and let live. I mean, I should live, and also I give chance to others live, not only human beings, and also all other beings from the Buddha's point of view. So as I mentioned in my presentation, that eco monks, particularly who are doing a lot of activities in Thailand and Cambodia. So nobody, of course, forced them to do so. I mean, by doing some kind of tree ordination, and also they are trying to, do some kind of coordination with government, local agencies, and they are teaching to local people how to protect our environment, etc. So environmental responsibility, what I understand from their activities, that out of their country's benefit, these monks, particularly who are eco monks, come forward to protect their country, to protect their country's environment. And they have taken a lot of ideas from the Buddha's teaching, and finally they are giving so-called tree ordination to different, I mean gardens, trees, and forests in their country. So this is their own responsibility, all right? Environmental responsibility. Each and every person, we can take this kind of responsibility to protect our environment. So this is how I think we can, awake to protect our environment, and this is our responsibility. Own responsibility. You should take this responsibility, each and individual person, not a community or a country. Each and every person. By that way, I think we can awake that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Deepan. John also mentions that Shantideva, the great 8th century philosopher poet, makes no mention of caring for the natural world in and for itself in the Bodhicharyavatara. That makes green Buddhism a tough sell for some Mahayana Buddhists.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. I actually have a friend named Amod Lele who has written an article, I think, called like Disengaged Buddhism, like against engaged Buddhism, based on the ideas of Shantideva. And I wonder, we have about 3 minutes for each of you. Can you say a word or two, and I'll begin with Gabriel, about moving people, fellow Buddhists, away from an overly inward view of life and practice toward engagement with the world? Because I think Buddhism has amazing resources for both, and many people fall, I think, too far into the inward, almost to navel gazing and disengagement with the world. So what simple advice would you give to moving people toward more engagement right now? So Gabriel.
Yeah, thank you. I had to go myself because I worked in sustainability for a long time, and it caused a lot of anxiety problems. And so I do think there is a place for the inward space. It's part of the whole middle path, right? Inward and outward, within, without, as above, so below, from the Taoists, I suppose. But there is a connection there. So I think to tip my hat to Deepan's noticing of codependent arising, right? There's no place to meditate if there are no trees. There's no place to reach transcendence. And so if you have any type of goal for anyone other than yourself to reach enlightenment, whether that's future generations or your neighbors or anything like that, you need to preserve the space in which that happens. And I think it's important to realize that I've read a good deal of Shantideva myself, and this whole Bodhisattva path is to help others reach enlightenment, and I think that it's very important that that word is disentangled, and really it's more about helping the network, not just the one, because of this codependent arising. There's no such thing as a Buddha without the Bodhi tree, without the ground beneath him. And then going on a microscopic level, all those wonderful microorganisms that made the Bodhi tree grow in the first place. So I think that would be what I would say to try to help with that, is to show that this idea of codependent arising kind of necessitates stewardship in its very state.
Thanks so much, Gabriel. How about you, Deepan?
I am in line with Gabriel. As I also highlighted in my presentation, that interconnected things, what I said, interdependence, everything is interdependence. If we apply this dependent coercion theory in our daily life with our environment, and we could get the solution through that actually. Whatever the causes arise, we do have, solution we can see this through our, though the Buddha directly has not mentioned about this environmental issue or global warming, etc. But by looking at his principle or dependent coercion, we could actually apply this kind of idea to change our world and to mitigate the so-called climate change. So in that sense, I would like to highlight one more thing actually from Buddha's point of view. As I said, greed, hatred, and delusion, all these kinds of mentality or defilements when we do have. So it is so difficult for us to completely change the world if you cannot control our mind. So in that case, what I say that mind is the forerunner here. You have to control our mind through our non-greed, non-hatred, and non-delusion aspects. So that way, I think we can get the proper or better solution. Yeah, this is my conclusion here. Thank you, Justin.
Excellent. Thank you both so very much. And thank you again, everybody who's joined in, asked questions, and taken part so far. We're almost at 5 o'clock my time, 7 o'clock East Coast time. So we're gonna take about a 10-minute break, and then we will resume with our next presenters. Thank you. All right, welcome back, everyone. And by way of very brief introduction, our next two presenters are John Negru and Tinette DeVoe. John will be talking about the Buddhist Center Environmental Action Plan Toolkit. He is the publisher at Sumeru Press, Canada's largest independent Buddhist book publisher, and author most recently of Bodhisattva 4.0, a primer for engaged Buddhists. Tinette is the founding editor for Buddha Dharma, the Practitioners Quarterly, which she helmed for roughly 20 years. She's currently the head of Beyond Coal Atlantic campaign, or the Beyond Coal Atlantic campaign for the Sierra Club Canada. She'll be talking about the climate.
Good afternoon, Sangha, friends, organizers, and audience. Welcome to the Buddhist Voices in the Climate Crisis Conference. Thank you for joining the conversation. My name is John Negru. I am the publisher at Sumeru Buddhist Books and one of the co-sponsors of this event. Today I want to tell you a little bit about a project I've been working on but have not as yet been able to bring to completion. I'm going to ask for your help later. So we all come from many different walks of life. We have varying degrees of involvement with our Sangha. We may be solitary practitioners, or we may be deeply involved in our communities. But whatever our involvement, we know, if we're here today, that green Buddhist practice is a vital part of our shared future as human beings on this planet. So back in 2019, I was at the time very concerned about biodiversity and habitat loss. And so I helped to write and publish a free resource for Buddhist centers called the Buddhist Center Environmental Action Plan Toolkit. I worked with a highly cited ecology scientist and a landscape architect who specializes in sacred gardens, both of whom are Sumeru authors of other books. And we created a free modifiable Microsoft Word template that religious organizations could use for environmental audits of their lands. It's available on my website, and it's been downloaded about 500 times. Many Buddhist centers are considering improvements to their properties, and that's a wonderful thing. They want to make them more energy efficient. They want to recycle more. But today I want to talk more about wild land, plants, and animals. Not in the sense of nature providing environmental services to humans, but basically to celebrate and recognize our interbeing with all that embraces. Buddhist centers in North America hold thousands of acres of wild land, and we could be a shining beacon for environmentally forward-thinking policy and practice that we could be sharing with other people, but that doesn't seem to be the case. So responding to that, I reached out to 108 North American Buddhist centers with rural properties, inviting them to use the template that we had created and to share their results with others, including us, as role models. I got a lot of warm responses from different people, but many of the folks said, gee, we don't really have an environmental policy, and so we don't really have examples of implementation. Other people said, gee, my knowledge of ecology is quite rudimentary, and we basically just do recycling in an organic garden. But two of the respondents, who are Thai Forest Theravada monasteries, one in British Columbia and one in England, are doing great things. And I profiled each of them in my Buddhistdoor global column called Bodhisattva 4.0. So around that time, we're talking early 2021, I found a very inspiring article about a young activist by the name of Molly Burhans, who has been working with the Pope to audit all of the church's global properties from an environmental point of view. If you just Google Molly Burhans, you'll find her name and the article profiling her in the New Yorker magazine. It's a really good article. I recommend it highly. Basically, what I liked about it was that she gave me a coherent framework and a methodology for applying an environmental audit for Buddhist centers. So I'm a retired high school technological education teacher, and a lot of what I taught was surveying, geomatics, civil engineering, urban planning, stuff like that. So when I read the article, I thought, wow, this is great. And I contacted some people I know at Esri. They are the software company that makes the industry standard GIS and cartography software that everybody uses. So I explained the project to them, about documenting all of these Buddhist centers. And they said, wow, this is a great project. We'd be glad to help you. We'll give you software. We'll give you expert advice, and we'll connect you with people we know who are our clients in government, because they do this kind of stuff all the time. They're dealing with indigenous land claims, and they're dealing with forest management, and so on and so forth. So great. Then boom, all of a sudden the pandemic hit and everything just kind of went fallow. So nothing's happened since then. I've followed a few leads to see if I could get it started again, but everything fizzled out. So basically I need an institutional partner who can work with me and help me reach out and gather all of this data. So now, 2022, we are seeing how conflict, war, and the collapse of our life support system are inextricably linked. The coming years on Earth are going to be very difficult. In my opinion, a Buddhist worldview is completely congruent with saving planet Earth from humans. Interbeing, spiritual cultivation, healthy restraint of desire for more stuff or power over others, reverence for nature, including plants, animals, and the cycles of life. All of these are baked in to Buddhism already. So we have a lot to offer, and we should be at every table where the future is being discussed. The spiritual dimension of the transformations we need to respond to our Anthropocene overshoot crisis is rarely discussed in secular environmental organizations. So for example, in Canada here, the Sustainability Network, a capacity building resource for environmental NGOs, focuses on management and leadership training, governance, organizational development, how to recruit influential board members, fundraising, and so on. All great stuff, but nothing to do with turning about in the mind, transforming one's values and behavior. Similarly, the Narwhal, which is a leading Canadian environmental online magazine, has no articles, and never had any articles about the spiritual dimension of social activism and how it's inextricably bound up with climate action. So in other words, paradigm shifts outside the scientific mode are not on the agenda for secular environmental organizations. Interfaith organizations with an environmental focus are few, parochial, and disconnected from much of mainstream discourse. For example, Faith and the Common Good is the leading interfaith environmental group in Canada. It has just over 150 member organizations. This includes just one member each from all the thousands of Buddhist, Sikh, Hindu, or Muslim communities across Canada. One Buddhist out of more than 550 Buddhist organizations across Canada. There's no Jewish member organizations either. So in other words, Faith and the Common Good comprises about 146 Christian churches. I'm doing the math from their map, since they don't actually list all of their members on their website in a way that's easy to see, which to me is another example of lack of strategic foresight in this area. Of these churches in Faith and the Common Good, the vast majority, 76, are in downtown Ottawa and Toronto. Vancouver, for example, has only one member. There are 134 members in Ontario and only 3 in Quebec. So very, very messed up. Our Anthropocene overshoot crisis is no secret, but we know that sufficient evidence alone is insufficient to change people's values and behavior. We human beings are in denial about our tiny window of opportunity, and we're overwhelmed by the complexity of what lies ahead. But if we only focus on supply side management, which is what a lot of environmentalists talk about, and we ignore the demand side, cooling down demand, and talking about degrowth, we're not going to succeed. So the way I see it, spiritual practice is the third leg of the stool. Less needs to be more, and I see a strong Buddhist connection here. In the United States, journalists and online publications like Anthropocene stick to scientific articles, or like Emergence or Loam, or Dark Mountain in the UK, provide moving but rather diaphanous suggestions about how to transform oneself and society for a regenerative future. There's a lot of magical thinking gap between what they would like their readers to do and what their readers actually understand and can do based on the articles. So I see a Buddhist connection here too, because the Eightfold Noble Path is a very robust methodology for guiding one's own life and society. We don't hear enough about that Eightfold Noble Path. So collectively, we are not doing a very good job of convincing people to stop flying everywhere for fun, stop buying stuff that they want but don't need, rethink their food webs, and unite in a common cause. Buddhists have very little to be smug about in this regard. So, for example, just recently I tried to post the Buddhist Center Environmental Action Plan Toolkit on the Extinction Rebellion Buddhists Facebook page. It was rejected by the admins because it did not, quote, advocate civil disobedience against the government, end quote. And that's just one example. Here's another one. A large and very well-funded Buddhist temple here in Canada has 4 really big rural properties northeast of Toronto, and they're building 4 enormous retreat centers on these 4 properties. The site plans that I've seen make no mention of preserving wild land. They're all about fancy gardens, lawns, and vistas, and spectacular temple buildings in the architectural style of famous Asian monasteries. The temple fought a multi-year lawsuit with the government of Ontario to stop a few wind farms that were going to be built in the vicinity. And they complained that these wind farms were going to, quote, disturb the tranquility of their meditators, unquote. The projects were eventually canceled for political reasons, along with other wind farms around the province, but it had nothing to do with the temple's lawsuit. Another Buddhist temple here in Ottawa just moved to a 90-acre rural property outside the downtown core. When I saw the site plan pre-build, I asked what their environmental policy was going to be and what their land use was going to be like on these 90 acres. And the nun said, well, I'll ask the abbess. And that was several years ago, and they have not gotten back to me at all. So as humans and as Buddhist community leaders, we've got to do a much better job than just sharing memes on Facebook groups, showing up at protests with placards, or reenacting nostalgic tropes of Buddhism's golden age. We need role models of positive examples of real-world best practices for now and tomorrow from Buddhists regarding the environment, and this is really serious business. I think that documenting land use by Buddhist organizations is really important. Putting that educational resource out there for everybody to see, to use, to build on, and to be inspired by, I think is a really important thing. I want to see transparency, I want to see accountability, and I want to see collaboration. So if you can help in getting the word out about the free Buddhist Center Environmental Action Plan Toolkit and the project to build on it, that would be great. Share it with your Sangha, post it on social media, talk about it with young people. If you have a great story to share about what you're doing, please share it. Let me know, let the world know. If you're in Canada, talk to your Sangha about joining faith and the common good. In the United States, organizations like Green Faith have a similar composition and are desperately in need of diversity from non-Christian voices. Asian Buddhists, please don't be strangers. Reach beyond your linguistic communities. This has been historically hard for you, I know, but your presence is needed. Don't be afraid to join your local environmentalist community and contribute in any way you can. This is not about converting environmentalists to Buddhism. This is about converting Buddhists to environmentalists. And if you would like to help me take this environmental audit of rural Buddhist centers to their next stage by volunteering your time and energy, that would be great. I'm volunteering my time and energy too. Please email me after the conference if you would like to connect. And thank you again for your time today. May the merit of this offering perfume the 10 directions and the 3 times. May it bring confidence to those fearful of the future. May it awaken the vows of Kshiti Garbha, Earth Treasure Bodhisattva, in each of us. Tashisho.
Hi, my name is Tinette DeVoe, and I'm really happy I can join you today as part of this conference on the climate crisis. You may recognize my name from Buddha Dharma, the Practitioners Quarterly. I was the founding editor of the publication, and it was a position I held for nearly 20 years. I left that work at the beginning of 2020 in order to focus my efforts on addressing the climate crisis. So what I'll do over the next few minutes is just share a little bit of what I've come to understand about the climate crisis, not only in terms of the urgency of it, but what it might take to turn things around. So let's start with where we are today. We know things are bad. All we have to do is look around us. I invite you as well to consider a question as you listen to this presentation and the other presentations during this conference. And that is simply, how will you be changed by what you know? It's one thing to take all this information in, but how do you take it in a way that makes it meaningful and that you can translate into some kind of action? We know from various international reports that the goal is to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming, and that's 1.5 above pre-industrial temperatures. We are already at 1.2 degrees Celsius of global warming, and we're seeing the impacts of that everywhere. Just over the past year, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change came out with several reports, and the last one is sort of dubbed the Now or Never report, where we're told that if in order to stay below 1.5 degrees of warming, that global emissions have to have already peaked by 2025 and need to be cut in half by 2030. Now, unfortunately, although the requirements of immediate drastic reductions in greenhouse gases is super clear, each country that goes away from international conferences seem to continue to speak about 2050. So all of the countries and corporations are talking about net zero by 2050, but we know that that will be far too late. Another thing I'll just mention, this is a photograph from the international COP26 meeting that was held in Glasgow not long ago. And you may find it interesting to know that there were more fossil fuel lobbyists there than representatives from any single country. So if fossil fuels had been a country, they would have been the most represented at COP26. So 1.5, well, first of all, as you can see from this map here, parts of the United States are already warming well beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius. These are land temperatures, and it kind of gives you, these hotspots kind of give you a window into the future of what that experience is like. And it's rough. So I live in Canada, where warming is happening at twice the rate as the rest of the world. And in the northern part of Canada, the average temperature increase has already reached 2.3 degrees. So what does this mean? It means different things depending on where you live. In India and Pakistan this year, temperatures reached 50 degrees Celsius, which is 122 degrees Fahrenheit. And people died. Harvests were destroyed, which led to greater food insecurity. And now, there's more conversation about temperatures that are beyond the ability of the human body to adapt to. We know that Europe has experienced a terrible heat wave since June, and it's having devastating effects. The fires are raging in Europe and elsewhere as a result of the drier, hotter conditions. And the fires are so hard to put out. We know that droughts are happening everywhere. This is a photograph taken in Texas. Here's one taken in India. And so depending on where you live, your ability to cope with the impacts of a drought are going to be significantly different. The same goes for floods, which are becoming more common and more extreme. Here's one photo from Montana, and here's one from Bangladesh. So everywhere you look, there are, harmful effects of climate change. This isn't something off into the future, which is how it was perhaps perceived even, 5-10 years ago. It is here, it is now, it is disproportionately impacting Indigenous people and Black people and people of color. This is a photograph taken in northern Alberta in a place called Fort McMurray, where we have the tar sands. And one of the outcomes of the climate crisis is that more and more people are having to leave their home countries in desperation because they simply cannot support themselves, their families, where they currently are. And we know, of course, that not only are people being severely impacted, but also wildlife and domesticated animals everywhere. Now, I know I'm talking about climate here, but it is it's so much more than climate change. It is biodiversity loss, which is human caused as well. This is a photograph of an area that's been clear cut, and we know factories are polluting the air and the water, as is mining. And so I think, generally when we're talking about the climate crisis, we're talking about all of this. And it just so happens that the climate crisis seems to be an easier way of kind of entering the conversation, because we can talk about a temperature and we can immediately relate to the impact of a heat wave, for example, or a devastating flood. But it's all of this. One of the things that I've found particularly challenging is holding the awareness of what's actually happening, not only close to home, but around the world, and feeling that people around me sort of are not aware of how serious things have gotten. And you can start to feel a little bit crazy, like you're wondering, is this some kind of dream that you're living that nobody else around you seems to get? But you're not crazy if you hold this awareness. And when you start to look for people who understand, you will absolutely find them. And so together, there's a community of people around the world who are doing what they can to address the crisis. One of the things I would suggest not doing is focusing on sort of the humanity versus the planet dichotomy, simply because I think that obscures the structures of power, which are at the root of not only the problem, but how to change the problem. Not all people are impacting the planet equally. And there are people and corporations and governments who are impeding the changes that are needed. And they're doing this because of very entrenched systems of power. So we have to be able to talk about that and not simply focus on sort of personal, individual carbon footprints. So we do know that global negotiations and promises, agreements, you name it, they're failing. I don't say this to be glib. I'm simply being realistic that it does not appear that at the global level we have sufficient commitments and even the ability to force governments to honor the commitments they've made. We know that fossil fuel companies are pushing back in myriad ways to slow down the transition to clean renewable energy and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. They've become particularly effective at greenwashing. And so now you'll hear companies talking about net zero oil drilling and by such and such a year. But there is no such thing as net zero when we're talking about fossil fuels. It is simply a manufactured idea that is not based on anything real. In addition to the fossil fuel companies, being very effective with greenwashing and misinformation, they've also tried to shift the blame to everyday people. So in 2000, British Petroleum came out with this handy dandy carbon footprint calculator so that people could, plug in their power usage, their energy usage, and find out how much they were impacting the planet. Now, there's nothing wrong with knowing what your carbon footprint is, but the impact of that was to shift the focus away from corporations and governments that are subsidizing fossil fuel companies and the banks that are financing them. It shifted the attention away from all of that to, did I drive this many miles or kilometers today? And where did I buy my coffee? So, it's a form of gaslighting, and we need to call it for what it is. I'll also point out that, this is a chart of banks that are funding fossil fuels in the billions of dollars. So again, going back to the idea that this is not simply, a case of humanity gone wrong, there are some very orchestrated players in this, and we need to be able to call them out if we're going to change things. I'll also point out that economic inequality has grown enormously, particularly since the 1990s and the era of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan and Stephen Harper. Neoliberalism supported deregulation, and you probably know from your own experience that people are being squeezed more and more. Not only are we seeing these differences exacerbated between countries, between the global north and south, but also within countries. So for example, within the United States and within countries in Europe, there is greater income inequality. And so our impact is not equal when it comes to, what's causing the climate crisis. So global methane emissions, I wanted to point this out because there's been a shift towards what's called natural gas, so-called natural gas, which is a fossil fuel. There's nothing more natural about that kind of gas than coal or oil. Again, a really good marketing branding, but the International Energy Agency recently reported that the emissions from natural gas drilling and pipeline leaks and burning of natural gas is actually 70% higher than is being reported. Why is that important? Well, actually, methane emissions are 86 times more potent when it comes to warming the atmosphere than carbon dioxide. And their impact is experienced primarily in the first 20 years. So these next few years, and certainly the 20-year span, is critical for the outcome that we're going to see. And the other thing that, this drives home to me is that the greenhouse gas emissions aren't all being counted. And I think there's a lot of, intentional underreporting by corporations and by governments, and the way that the systems have been set up to capture that information. So we can't rely on these promises to get us anywhere near a kind of net zero scenario. So where does that leave us? Lately, I've been talking to people about the Hunger Games. This is, I read the trilogy with my son when he was young, and it seems to describe the situation that we find ourselves in today, where, people are still doing the work of oil and gas drilling and coal mining because they are forced to, feed their families, and there are no other jobs in their areas. And, we're also, whether we see it directly or not, we're impacting people elsewhere. So for those who are able to live comfortably in North America, the immediate impact is that people in the global South will be paying the price for our comfort. So, I would encourage you to think about this as a Hunger Games, and a Hunger Games that we didn't create, actually, not most of us. It is, in the Hunger Games, there's the capital, and it's a group of elites who live very well, and they've created the game and the way it's played and the rules, and it seems rather intractable. But I won't spoil the ending. But it's not impossible to overcome. I try to remind people that I really do think we have more power than we realize, and I think one of the most radical, disruptive, and powerful things we can do is to share the stories of where people are succeeding and communities are managing to transition off of fossil fuels and do good, despite what's stacked up against them. I've grown particularly fond of working in the area of energy democracy. So this is looking at energy that is owned by the people. It can come in the form of a cooperative model or a municipal utility. And because it's not geared towards private profit, it's actually looking at what the needs of the community are. And any revenue that's generated is going straight back into those communities, whether it's supporting the infrastructure for the community energy systems, or building a daycare, or helping to bring broadband internet to rural areas, or addressing energy poverty, and producing energy efficiency programs. So this is happening all over the world, and it's not headline news. And if you just even do a search, an internet search on energy democracy, you may find some examples of it close to home. So just bringing it back to my starting question, how will you be changed by what you know? I would encourage you not to feel overwhelmed, and to look at, within your sphere, what influence might you have? I think we really want to stop looking to others to save us. I don't think anyone's coming to save us, but I think as individuals in community, we have power, and we can support change, and sometimes even just showing what's possible is the change that's needed, because it disrupts the dominant narrative that, for example, transitioning off fossil fuels is either too expensive, too hard, or the technology isn't there yet. That's actually a lie. And I would encourage you to lean into that. And if you're not certain about that, and find out for yourself. I've done my homework, and I feel confident in calling out that lie. We have the solutions available to us. It's not more expensive than transitioning to other fossil fuels. And it's happening. We're seeing it happening on a much smaller scale. And it could be scaled up if we can root out the systems that are preventing it.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Unmute John and Jeanette, I believe. So I've asked to unmute you, and I see you're unmuted, John, and so are you, Jeanette. Thank you both so much for being here. Inspiring presentations. I don't have any immediate questions. We had some good chat in the discussions, but no questions jumped up. I wonder if you have any questions or thoughts for one another based on your presentations.
I had a question for you, Tynette. So when you talk about energy democracy, I wonder how to decentralize it. So for example, once I tried to get my school to put a solar farm on the roof. And they said, oh, no, we can't do it because Ontario Hydro will charge us an arm and a leg to hook up with the grid. And if we do it on your school, then we have to do it on the whole board to get economies of scale, et cetera. In the same way, you know, I'd love to get a little wind turbine for my house. And I know that there are many, many designs that are noise-free, bird-friendly, powerful, and don't involve the same kind of rape of the land that the large-scale wind farms do. So how do you, you know, you specifically in Atlantic Canada with the Sierra Club, what's your game plan for that? How do you get people to do that?
Well, part of it is like there are two parts to energy democracy. One is looking at where it's working and why it's working. And so what I've been doing is sharing success stories here in Atlantic Canada that show that actually, yeah, you can dramatically reduce a town's greenhouse gas emissions by transitioning and all this energy efficiency stuff. And hey, it's cheaper and you get to hire a lot more local people. So then as people start to learn about that, they're like, wow, that's incredible. I want to do that too, right? And that's where you meet with, oh, there's this rule that says it's more important that Nova Scotia Power get more profit than that we reduce greenhouse gases emissions efficiently and ensure affordability. So part of it is deconstructing the lie that renewable isn't possible, too expensive, we're not quite there yet. What if the wind doesn't blow? And then helping people along until they hit a roadblock. Then when there's the roadblock, there are other communities working on similar roadblocks, and we can have a juicy conversation that can find its way to the legislatures. We have to break the monopolies, whether they're public monopolies, state-run or provincial crown corporations, or private entities. They are run as monopolies. And actually, I will try to put a YouTube link in the chat in a moment, which there was a great kind of satire, but very well-researched one on how utilities operate and the monopoly function. And we know we have to decentralize, like the big utility companies, state-run or big provincial ones, they will not be able to ride out the climate crisis. You know, in order for communities to have a more secure energy grid, it has to be more distributed and decentralized. So nothing is going to change overnight with this kind of thing, but the reality is that promises have not been kept for the last 40 years. And so we got to try something other than asking government to do the right thing. I'm not saying we don't ask that. Let's ask that too. But, you know, I know you're Canadian, John, and there was a report that came out last November from the federal government, from the Auditor General's office, and it showed that Canada has never met a greenhouse gas reduction target that it has set going back to 1990. So anybody on this call who thinks like Canada is so good, you know, like forget it. You know, we've got a prime minister who's very good on the world stage at, you know, saying, oh, yes, we're going to do this and this and this. Never kept a promise in 40 years. So, so let's talk to people at the community level, because you will be inspired to find out what they're actually pulling off, you know. Yeah. If people are interested in learning more about energy democracy, I put my email in the chat and you can reach out to me. I will be doing some webinars on this stuff, and we have a website with information.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thank you, Jeanette. Yeah, I mean, I kind of say the same thing. Oh, I wonder what organizations are in your area, John, that can help you, like locally, citywide, provincially. I know here in Montana.
There is a group here in Ottawa, hang on, excuse me, called Ottawa Biosphere Eco City. And I've been talking to them about doing an interfaith workshop where we teach faith community leaders how to present this in their communities and to awaken that kind of interest in doing things specifically locally here in Ottawa that can help, whether it's regenerating the microbiome or you know, having a more decentralized electrical grid and so on. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that plays out. I think, Tynette, I don't have a lot of expectation that the dinosaurs are going to suddenly change. I'm just asking that there be some loopholes for individuals at a more local scale to do things. And I know that a lot of what I see as positive motion in the environmental area is municipally based. It's not provincial, it's not federal, it's not international, it's not COP26. All of that stuff is BS as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
So
yeah, look to your municipalities and connect them, if you can, with networks, both national, regional, and international networks. Like, you're right, municipalities are taking the lead, and they're supporting one another around the world to rapidly reduce greenhouse gases within their, you know, doing what they can. Because here in Canada, at least, municipalities have a hand in 50% of all greenhouse gas emissions in the country. So they can make a dent, and we tend to have more influence at the local level in our, you know, cities and towns than we do at the state or provincial or national levels.
even if
We
they
had
would
a
just
question
pass a
from
by.
phone review, Kennedy. Sorry, quick question. Have you, Tynette, have you collaborated with Indigenous leaders or leadership in your work? And can you talk about some of that if you have?
Yeah, you know, I'm having conversations with traditional Indigenous leaders in Atlantic Canada, and you know, the key is making sure that they're involved in the ground floor of any community conversations around energy projects. And one of the challenges that they're facing is that companies are coming to their communities and saying, we want to build a wind farm on your land and we'll give you some of the profits or whatever. But they're not being given enough control over the process. So in my work, I'm trying to share what I know and offer, you know, my background in connections in renewable energies, and kind of tell them what I'm hearing in the boardrooms, you know, that that they may not have heard. But I think there's a really great opportunity for working together, you know.
Thank you. Question for John that came in from Alex Kakuyo. Can you point to some Buddhist organizations that are moving in the right direction from an ecology perspective?
I wish I could give you a huge list, but in fact, we are green Buddhists still very much outliers in the Buddhist firmament. I will just direct you to the bottom of your screen where it says there are 24 participants in this call. So you know, we're not awakening faith in the way with a lot of Buddhists. But I will say, on the other hand, you know, there are local initiatives. There's the international network of engaged Buddhists, people like Buddhist Global Relief with Bhikkhu Bodhi. There is Koryug in the Himalayas. The Drukpa Lama's lineage does eco padyatras every year. So there's a lot of stuff going on, but they're not getting the message out sort of everywhere. Alex, if you look, I mean, even within your own Jodo Shinshu tradition, I've just been talking with Jeff Wilson about doing a book specifically about engaged Buddhism in the Jodo Shinshu perspective. And another fellow I just heard from in Japan, his name is Jonathan Watts, I think, wants to do a book with me about engaged Buddhism in Japan. So there's definitely stuff going on. But like the mycelia and the fungus underneath the trees in the forest that are feeding all that microbiome, it's not healthy. It's not getting out to everybody that sense of this larger sangha. So that's kind of a rambling sentence, but yes, that's the answer, Alex.
I would say too, though, that I mean, Buddhists crop up in all kinds of environmental groups. So it may be that, you know,
as individuals.
So it may be that the Sangha, you know, is not leading the way. But I think more and more Buddhists, and I was really quite pleased to see that in Extinction Rebellion, you know, there's quite a contingent there of Buddhists.
Yeah, they have a whole chapter.
Yeah. So yeah, it may be that it will manifest differently. And I think for a lot of faiths that is sort of how it's going. But I agree that Buddhism is a little behind the curve. Other religions are a little bit more organized at the institutional level around these issues.
Yeah, I think we're coming to the end of our kind of time period, and so I think we're coming very close to the last question I asked the last two presenters was in moving, like how do we move people, or how do we encourage those those Buddhists who are part of the environmental movement to go back to their Sangha and get the whole Sangha involved. I guess I'll throw that out as a question to you. Is there anything we can do, a tool we can give them, or a direction we can put them in to help them, maybe encourage them to go to their Sangha and say, we're not just here to meditate, we're not just here to do the strictly Buddhist stuff that we've been told. We need to be active in saving the earth. I'll begin with you, Tanette.
Yeah, you know, I know you linked to an editorial I wrote to say goodbye to Buddha Dharma readers. And what I explained was simply what I feel, which is if I am to take my vows to heart, my Bodhisattva vow, that I had to, you know, take what I had learned as a call to action and lean into this work more fully in addressing the climate crisis. So that's not to say that people can't be Buddhist priests and ministers or whatever, but if we're people of faith because we want to better understand the nature of things and what suffering is around us, we have to actually, you know, walk the talk. So, yeah, I feel like it's kind of a spiritual dilemma that people have to work through for themselves.
John, any final word of encouragement?
I would say that the best tool that we have in our toolkit is to tell good stories about alternative scenarios for the future that are things that people can say, oh, you know what, I could do that. I could do that, and I'm going to do that. We're so inundated in the mainstream discourse with the doom and gloom, the problem, the challenge, the disaster. We're screwed, right? So go out and buy something, or, you know, take a cruise or whatever, because nothing else matters. And so those two articles that I did for you about Birken Forest Monastery in BC, where they totally retrofitted their building in the most passive way and, you know, shared their energy journey with the world. And then the monastery in England, where they rewilded their chestnut grove and did amazing things. Those are the inspiring things. That's what I want to do with this environmental toolkit project too, is to get all of the different Buddhist centers in North America or elsewhere to say, hey, look, here's some great stuff. Just like you're saying, Tynette, you know, like if you can just show people how to do it in their community, and then they start to realize, hey, we can do this. You know, we don't need natural gas. We can use geothermal heat pumps. It's better, right? Tell the builders to, you know, make that part of the package, building a new house or whatever. So
I would just say, sorry, go ahead.
Just basically positive stories. Stop telling us about what the problem is. We all know what the problem is. Give us a way out of it.
But I think once we inspire them with the positive stories, we have to walk with them as they come up against power, because the powers that be are going to prevent those very sensible solutions from being implemented. And that's going to be a different kind of awakening for people as they wake up to the fact that we're in this mess, not by chance, but by design. And that it's going to take a different kind of muscle to disrupt and dismantle that.
They go hand in hand, I think.
I agree. Yeah. We went overtime. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you both so much. And thanks again to everybody who's been here. We'll take a short break and come back in about 8 minutes. All right, welcome back, everybody. And we're going to get into our last video of today's part of our conference. And this one is by Michael Buckley. It's titled Meltdown at the Third Pole. Michael Buckley is a Canadian author. He stumbled into Lhasa in 1985 to write the first English guidebook to Tibet. And he's been returning to explore the Tibetan plateau over the last 35 years, primarily focusing on looking at its environmental programs. Currently, he has a website called meltdowntibet.com, which we'll make sure there's a link to. And with that, we'll jump into his video. Thank you.
Greetings, Tasha Dalai. We're going to talk about the crisis at the third pole. And to start with, let's go back a few decades to 1989, when His Holiness the Dalai Lama was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Not so well known, His Holiness has been a staunch defender of the environment for decades. His Nobel Peace Prize was the first ever awarded for environmental initiative. He in fact advocated for the preservation of Tibetan culture and environment. At the time, he proposed the transformation of Tibet into a biosphere reserve and a zone of peace, a buffer between China and India. And Tibet being twice the size of Western Europe, that would be a giant biosphere reserve, the largest on the planet. Had he been taken up on that initiative, Asia would be in much better shape today. Unfortunately, China has chosen to exploit Tibet heavily with mega dams and mega mining, indulging in ecosystem destruction. This ecosystem destruction has accelerated since the arrival of the railway in Lhasa in 2006. But let's go back much further in time, over a millennium, to the oldest surviving text of written Tibetan from the 9th century AD, which includes this poetic fragment. This center of heaven, this core of the earth, this heart of the world, fenced round with snow, the headland of all rivers, where the mountains are high and the land is pure. This shows the immense pride that Tibetans took in their icy environment. Tibetans, in a sense, developed the world's first national parks, which are actually sanctuaries consecrated by high lamas, where everything must be left untouched. Tibetans safeguarded their lands and their wildlife for thousands of years. They developed the concept of sacred landscape. They developed the concept of interconnectedness. The Jalaka tales detail the 500 previous lives of the Buddha, even when Buddha was an elephant. And even insects were respected, though there were no mosquitoes in Tibet. It was too high for them, but they are coming in now. It's being spotted in Lhasa, unfortunately. Tibetan Buddhism built on the original Bon Animus faith of believing in spirits dwelling in trees, water bodies, and mountaintops. Tibetan Buddhism is more of a code of ethics, a moral compass fostering great respect for nature, for wildlife, all sentient beings. And this is what Tibetan Buddhism brings to the table. Great respect for nature. His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, identify where problems lie. He says, destruction of nature and natural resources results from ignorance, greed, and lack of respect for the earth's living things. American scientist Gus Speth echoes this, saying, I used to think the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that with 30 years of good science, we could address these problems, but I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with those, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. But Tibetan Buddhism has solutions because it has developed a system of ethics and beliefs that respect and protect nature, embracing compassion for all sentient beings, and stressing how all life is interconnected. His Holiness the Dalai Lama calls for global action by secular ethics, not based on any religion. He says the reality of the world today is that grounding ethics in religion is no longer adequate. I'm increasingly convinced that the time has come to find a way of thinking about spirituality and ethics beyond religion altogether. The fact is that we need science and ethics to come together to solve the climate crisis. Science by itself can be dangerous. Ethics provides the moral compass. I'm going to briefly sketch out the looming crisis at the third pole, looking at the melting glaciers, thawing permafrost, rivers under threat, major deltas sinking and receding, and what all this means for Asia. That's a lot of ground to cover in 15 minutes or so I hope you're still with me at the conclusion. Ethnic Tibet, the pre-1950 version, covered 2.3 million square kilometers, roughly the size of Western Europe. The entire Tibetan plateau encompasses some 46,000 glaciers. That's approximately a quarter of the global total. So Tibet is a great refrigerator of the planet, along with the other two poles. And it has a host of sacred peaks, starting with Mount Kailash in the far west Tibet to Namche Bawa in the eastern Tibet, and further east to Mount Kawakapo. In Tibetan, it is known as Gangchen, the land of snows, but these days it should be called perhaps the land of melting snows. Outside of the Arctic and Antarctic, the Tibetan Plateau is the largest source of fresh water, which is why it is known as the third pole. But unlike the other two poles, Tibet supplies fresh water to people downstream on its extensive river system. The best way to visualize this is H2O, highlands to ocean. Everything in Tibet is monumental in scale, going from Everest, it's a drop of almost 9,000 meters down to sea level. The average elevation of Tibet is around 4,000 meters. Tibet has the highest mountains on the planet, and its rivers run through the deepest gorges on the planet. Due to climate change and global heating, mostly driven by vast emissions from China and India, the glaciers are melting rapidly. Over the next decades, this will lead to flooding and to unprecedented disasters, such as one in Tibet where the entire glacier collapsed. And then as the glaciers recede, eventually this will lead to a severe lack of water to feed rivers, which will be a major crisis. The melting of glaciers can be slowed down, but solutions seem far away. A major factor contributing to glacial meltdown is the burning of fossil fuels in both China and India. That releases CO2 into the atmosphere, which leads to warming. And it also releases particles of black soot, known as PM 2.5 or PM 10. It is currently thought that up to half of the meltdown can be attributed to black soot. Black soot is not a greenhouse gas, it's particles. And it comes from the burning of fossil fuels. So in theory, if you stop the burning of fossil fuels, there'll be no more black soot. And that would solve two problems: better health for people with cleaner air. And the other problem is the glaciers, because the black soot darkens the glaciers, which attracts the sun, which means faster meltdown. But neither China nor India seem to have the least bit of interest in stopping their coal addiction. Neither nation has indicated a target for coal reduction by 2030. In fact, the use of coal is increasing in both China and India. It's not just the glaciers of Tibet that are melting. Under the surface, the permafrost is thawing. Across Tibet, there's a thick layer of ice under the ground, the third largest region of permafrost on the planet. This layer of ice retains moisture in the crust of the earth, which is essential for grasses and plant life to survive. Without the permafrost, there's definitely more danger to desertification. Grasslands of Tibet constitute an enormous carbon sink, and if the permafrost thaws, it will release methane, a greenhouse gas reckoned to be 80 times more potent than CO2. China's plundering of Tibetan resources is contributing to the rapid degradation of the grasslands. The grasslands is not exactly a natural system. It evolved through millennia of Tibetan nomads grazing the yaks. So in a sense, the yaks are the gardeners of the grasslands and the Tibetan nomads are the stewards. They need to rotate their livestock to keep the grasslands in good shape. This ancient system has been severely disrupted by Chinese introduction of fencing and then moving the nomads off their traditional grazing lands altogether and sending the yaks to the slaughterhouses. This policy has been roundly condemned by the UN IPCC and other watchdogs, but China continues with this misguided policy and indulges on top of that in greenwashing by announcing the creation of a large number of national parks and reserves in Tibetan regions, which turn out to be parks on paper only, designed to remove nomads to make way for Chinese mining and megadams. A big factor in the destruction of the grasslands today and desertification is the expansion of mining, Chinese mining, There are over 120 valuable minerals that China wants to get its hands on, including lithium, extracted from lakes in Qinghai and far west Tibet. And there's been deforestation on a massive scale at the edges of the Tibetan plateau. The original wild grazers of the plateau have been hunted to near extinction levels, including the fabulous animals like the wild yak, the third largest mammal in Asia after the elephant and the rhino. Also threatened is the Tibetan antelope, with the finest underwool in the world. And rising temperatures are sending these species higher in elevation and actually heading towards extinction. Tibet hosts unique high altitude biodiversity, from the fabulous blue poppy flowering at 4,000 meters to bar-headed geese, which fly over the Himalayas twice a year. Astronauts on the wing, that's the highest migration in the world. So the solutions are stop deforestation, stop mega mining, keep the Tibetan nomads in place to counter loss of grasslands, and stop the advancing desertification. I'd like to take a look at the rivers of Tibet. Tibetan Plateau does something that the two poles cannot do. It supplies fresh water to people one way or another, up to 2 billion people. So there are 10 major river systems that originate in Tibet, carving rivers through the deepest gorges on the planet. The 500-kilometer long Yalam Sampo Gorge is 3 times deeper than Colorado's Grand Canyon. No glaciers, no rivers. Well, there is monsoon rain, but that is not a constant glacier drip feed. So some rivers sourced in Tibet are heavily glacier dependent, such as the Indus, which flows through Pakistan and India and is the lifeline of Pakistan. Other rivers are less dependent on glaciers. China is building megadams on all the major rivers of Tibet. These are dams that block sediment and fish migration, both essential for agriculture and fisheries downstream. China recently announced that it aims to become carbon neutral by the year 2060, but neglected to mention how this will be achieved, given that China is heavily addicted to coal, supplying over 60% of its power. It seems a significant part of the carbon neutrality will be achieved by building new megadams, and there is only one place to do that. You have to keep in mind that China currently has over 25,000 large dams, which is more than the rest of the world combined. So it's maxed out in China itself. There's only one place you can build new dams, and that's in Tibet. It has a potential of 70 gigawatts of power at the Great Band of Yalam Sampo, for example. To back this up, China is a proponent of the green dam myth, which claims that megadams are renewable and sustainable energy with zero emissions. This is far from the truth. For starters, megadams have significant methane emissions from rotting vegetation that is being flooded by megadam reservoirs, which are massive in size. In addition to boosting the construction of megadams, China plans to hoard and divert water from megadams on a scale that has never been seen in recorded history. This is essentially theft of water, which the downstream nations rely on. The solutions would seem to be obvious: a moratorium on dam building across the Himalayan range, but none of the players are interested in that option. Another way to do this would be preserve river corridors, such as the proposed Kanali River corridor in Nepal. That's the last free-flowing river from Tibet there. And there is a much better solution, which is to find alternate energy sources which are not dams, such as solar power. At the tail end of the mighty rivers from Tibet lie great deltas: the Yangtze River Delta, the Mekong Delta, the Indus Delta, and the largest delta in the world, the Ganges-Brahmaputra Delta. These deltas are dying in the sense that they are slowly sinking due to lack of incoming coarse sediment, sand, and due to rising sea levels. We are facing a global sand crisis. The world is running out of sand because sand cannot be generated fast enough to keep up with the extraction of sand. That is mostly due to rampant dredging of river sand. River sand is the best for making concrete because beach sand is too corrosive and salty, and desert sand is too fine. So the dredging of river sand is going on a massive scale, mostly illegal, operated by the sand mafia in places like China, Cambodia, Vietnam, and many other nations. Along with megadam construction, which blocks the passage of coarse sediment downstream, this all leads to saltwater intrusion, which will kill crops and threaten food and water security in these vast regions. This is already happening along the mighty Mekong River, where Chinese megadam builders have completed 11 major dams. Shawan Dam on the Mekong is the height of the Eiffel Tower from the base up, to give you an idea of scale. This dam is twice the size of Potala Palace for width and height. And its massive reservoir impounds 15 billion cubic meters of water. That's billion with a B. Shawan has an output of 4,200 megawatts, the size of 4 nuclear reactors. And upstream, an even bigger monster, Nwazadu Dam at 5,820 megawatts. Between those two dams, they generate 10 gigawatts of power, which is enough to power up a small nation in Europe. These megadams are slowly triangling the river, blocking nutrient-rich silt from reaching Vietnam's Mekong Delta, which leads to sediment starvation, leaving the delta open to saltwater intrusion, which will kill rice crops on which the nation of Vietnam depends. Blocking fish migration and spawning, leading to the slow death of the world's largest inland fishery, and particularly Lake Tonle Sap in Cambodia, is another factor. Cambodia's protein comes from fishing in this lake, and that depends on the flood pulse of the Mekong, which is not happening these days. Species that are disappearing are the giant catfish and the Mekong dolphin. What is needed here is a moratorium on river sand dredging, which is totally unsustainable, or at least strict regulation of that. Moratorium on building megadams on the rivers of Tibet to keep these rivers free flowing. Regarding all of the preceding, the melting glaciers, the thawing permafrost, the ecosystem collapse generated, nothing much is being done at global level to address the issues. The United Nations, the rescue, not likely. Tibet is not represented as a nation at any events like UN get-togethers, and China is not about to talk about its rampant exploitation of Tibet. So the third pole continues to head for a disaster of epic proportions, titanic proportions. There are, however, some rays of hope with some great solutions from the Tibetan Buddhist world in the Himalayan region. Ladakh is a shining model. It gets tons of sunshine, high altitude desert. So there's vast solar potential, which is being utilized in solar farms with gigawatts of power. So Tibet is second only to the Sahara in terms of solar potential, and these solar farms can rival the output of megadams. Another ingenious solution from Ladakh is ice stupas, which replicate the action of glaciers by storing winter ice and slowly releasing water over the summer months for irrigating crops. Behind this idea is Ladakhi engineer Sonam Wanchuk. These ice stupas are expensive to build, cost around $30,000 to build one. And they would never get off the ground without the support of Drigong Kyabgon Chetsang Rinpoche, who rallied monks and volunteers around construction of ice stupas in Piang Valley, for example. Over 50% of Bhutan has been set aside for national parks, wildlife reserves, and wildlife corridors, the only nation in the world that can claim to have done that. Famed American biologist E.O. Wilson introduced the Half-Earth Plan long ago, suggesting that setting aside half the planet would allow for recovery of nature. The way we're going, we'd be very lucky to see a third of the planet set aside for that. The tiny nation of Bhutan claims another great milestone, which is all organic farming, no GM crops, using natural pesticides like yak urine. Bhutanese policy is advised by Dr. Vandana Shiva, India's top environmental activist, who has taken on the likes of Monsanto in India. Monsanto has attempted to patent seeds in India and around the world, and Vandana Shiva rightly says, this is ridiculous. You cannot patent life. Besides which, the pesticides and herbicides used with Monsanto are lethal and cause such phenomenon as bee colony die-offs. Over 70% of Bhutan is forested by in its constitution, and the one area where Bhutan falters is construction of large dams to export hydropower to India. Bhutan has done its part, but other neighbors have not, so Bhutan suffers from indirect fallout, such as the glacial lake outburst floods, which result from glacial meltwater pooling into a lake, which then bursts its banks and can wipe out entire villages in a deluge of mud and water. I'd like to come back to His Holiness the Dalai Lama and his initiatives for environment and education. He says this: environmental education about the consequences of the destruction of our ecosystems and the dramatic decrease in biodiversity must be given top priority. that creating awareness is not sufficient. We must find ways to bring about changes in the way we live. I call on the younger generation, be rebels demanding climate protection and climate justice, because it is your future that is at stake. And His Holiness has introduced the SEE learning curriculum. SEE stands for Social, Emotional, and Ethical Learning, which is the establishment of a long cherished dream of his to establish a worldwide initiative to educate the heart and mind. Indeed, our survival on this planet may well depend on promoting the values that His Holiness the Dalai Lama holds dear: secular ethics, compassion, world peace, warm-heartedness, universal responsibility, and working together globally. What is desperately needed to tackle the climate crisis is a change of consciousness. Buddhism can lead the way. Namaste.
Thank you, Michael, and it's good to see you again. Justin has asked me to step in as the host for our little moderation because he's having some bandwidth issues. So basically, I just want to say that to the people who are here, Michael is the editor of This Fragile Planet, His Holiness the Dalai Lama on Environment. So this is something very dear to his heart, obviously. And he's also the author of a book called, Michael, take it away. Tell us about your children's book.
It's called The Snow Leopard's Best New Friend, and it's designed for children 8 and up. How is the audio? Is the sound is okay? Yeah, okay. It's designed for children 8 and up, but it's a very sneaky book because it's got a section at the back which is discussion and activism. Now, I believe kids are the greatest activists on the planet because they're fearless. They got nothing to lose. They don't have jobs, things like this they could lose. And they badger their parents to do things. They tell them, listen, you've got to save those leopards. You have to save them. And the parents say, what leopards? Who? Where? And they get parents to do things that they wouldn't normally do. So it's a very sneaky initiative on my part. But what was interesting about the whole thing was nobody knows anything about the animals of Tibet. It's really hard to get research on the number of species of wolves, for example. We don't know how many there are. They're still discovering them. And I decided, because I had a background in guidebook writing, I collected all this information. And I thought, well, the fabulous animals, let's get it out there. And people of any age can read this book, actually. I've had adults who read it, don't even realize it's a kid's book. But thank you for publishing it, John, because we need to get things out there. But I'll come back to the other more important book, perhaps This Fragile Planet, because this is a project that's been going for some time. It's actually, the author is His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who's probably the most, people don't realize that, but he's probably the most foremost environmental activist on the planet. I mean, he's so well known, right? I mean, of course, the Pope is also an environmental activist, but not in the same way. I think he's preaching to his congregation more. The Dalai Lama he approaches secular ethics. And, he's saying we can't base this on religion. We have to have secular ethics. And that's his approach. He wants to, embrace everybody and get them behind. So the idea of that book is to show him as an environmental activist, which is he's very underrated. He's well known as a spiritual person, an advocate for peace and compassion and sanity, and but not known as environmental activists at all, really. So and also to show the majesty of Tibet and to show what I've just been talking about in that talk, that there's incredible problems being faced up there, but nobody's doing anything about it. Not India, not China. They're not doing anything about it.
So how do you think, what would be the best way to raise awareness about this huge problem that nobody wants to talk about?
Well, it's a difficult one. I mean, I've been at it for years, trying to do things about this. There's been conferences, Tibetans go to conferences, but the thing is, it's the scale is, we're talking about a problem where if you got a population of coming up to 8 billion, and 2 billion of those people depend on rivers sourced in Tibet, that's quite a significant situation that's happening. And if there's a disruption to that water supply, which there has been, because China turns the tap on and off occasionally, especially with the Mekong. They could it's like a tap. With their dams, basically they can turn that tap on and off and they don't give notice. So suddenly you've got a situation where they've weaponized water. They can tell the downstream nations, you don't play ball with us, we'll just cut your water off, water supply, more or less. There's nothing about these nations could do. So one solution that we suggested was to turn the map upside down and have China at the receiving end. But of course, these are very impractical kind of solutions, just like a joke. The other thing is to turn the clock back in time to 1990, when none of these big dams existed and things were working fine. But things like desertification, that's happening across the Tibetan plateau at an alarming rate, and across Central Asia as well, and parts of India. These things can be contained. They can be contained if you use the right policies, the right grassland policies, which China is not doing. So it seems, in some ways like a hopeless or a helpless situation. But then you look at these northern sections of India, which are heavily populated by Tibetans, and they've got it under control. Bhutan is doing wonderful things. So Sikkim, so is Ladakh. How, parts of Nepal. How come they can do it, but other people can't? Well, the question really comes down to their attitude. These are Tibetan Buddhists, and you don't have to tell them about environment. It's already ingrained in their faith. You don't have to tell them to not kill animals, don't kill insects, this kind of thing. It's already in there. They've been environmentalists from day one. So, I think if we can spread this attitude somehow more, I guess it all comes down to respect. It comes down to respect for, nature. If you respect nature, then you're not going to kill nature. That's the thing. So rather than going out hunting animals, you should be photographing them, have some respect for the animals. They're part of the system, especially like yaks on the grasslands. They're part of the system that needs to be preserved. And if you don't preserve it, the system starts to break down. Then you start to get ecosystem collapse, which is what we're seeing there now, especially with the, with the collapsing glaciers. That's a new phenomenon in Tibet. The whole glacier just developed into an avalanche, more or less. This is a few years ago. But these kind of disasters are becoming more and more common now. And see, the thing is, the big catalyst now, if there's a disaster, then people say, okay, well, so what caused that? Well, we better fix that. The classic case is what happened in towards 1998, I think it was, around the Yangtze. There was massive flooding, hundreds of thousands killed. And they sent out a team and they said, okay, so what caused this? And they said, well, you cut all the trees down. Oh, okay. So put a moratorium on cutting all the trees down, which was on the eastern side of Kham, Amdo. And then what happened was all of the Chinese companies, which were logging for furniture and chopsticks, they all went into Southeast Asia and started demolishing forests, from Papua New Guinea to Borneo, everywhere else. They just demolished these places. Rather, they shifted the problem from Yangtze to other nations. They didn't solve the problem, they just shifted it. And there's too much of this going on. You don't solve a problem by shifting it. That's it's not going to work. All you're doing is creating a problem. So, basically what's happening, maybe you've solved that problem there, but you created a bigger problem somewhere else. And that's not on, right? And that's the same thing with the rivers. You solve one problem by having a dam, but then you create a bigger problem downstream. It's the classic case of this, really, if you want to get into this, is Australia. I think they brought in 100 cane toads to solve a problem with eating bugs. And then before they knew it, there were millions of these cane toads everywhere. They couldn't contain the problem. They got this huge problem with cane toads. So you try to solve one problem, you create a much, much bigger one. And that, unfortunately, is what's happening in a lot of places. It's these solutions are not working. So you need solutions that are going to work 100%, that are going to be sure to do. And we don't see a lot of that happening in the third pole because China's not terribly interested. They're only interested in exploiting the place. India is kind of ignoring the whole thing. The only time, like I said, the only time they'll really wake up and do anything is when there's a big disaster. And they said, oh, there's a problem. Okay, let's pay some attention to this problem, right? So I think the Dalai Lama is on the right track by, let's introduce this in education. Let's introduce this in schools by bringing in the SEE learning curriculum. Let's develop a little bit of ethics here, a bit of respect, and maybe that will solve our problems. Instead of having a war, Why don't we have a discussion instead, you know? We don't need the war to work it out. Let's go down to the bargaining table and, have a discussion. So I think he's on the right track there, that we need to be taught ethics somehow, but how do you teach ethics? This is the problem, is you've got so many religions that are in control of ethics and they tell you, what the rules are. And some of these religions are totally at odds when it comes to ethics. What's ethical in one religion is totally not ethical in another. So, here's our issue. So then what he's going after is secular ethics, which I think is a splendid idea. But then who's going to formulate the secular ethics? Where does that come from? That's another issue. So,
Thank you.
Anyway, if anybody has some questions, like if you wanted to ask some questions.
I had a
we
question.
have
I have to
questions
apologize.
for
I'm having
people?
network issues. So having some difficulties staying with hearing everything you're saying, but you mentioned these, the ice stupas, and I think that's incredibly inspiring. The potential for solar power. There was a recent story just a few weeks or months ago about activists turning all of the prayer flags around the major stupa in Bodhnath white.
Mm-hmm.
Taking out the dye because they say this is an environmental waste, and we can just have white prayer flags. It works just as well. So I mean, kind of small things, but I wonder if built up or connected to create a platform of environmental preservation that could help save Tibet and save the pole.
Yeah, well, I think you can start with small things. Small things definitely can snowball into much bigger things. I mean, look at Greta Thunberg. She started with one person just holding up a little placard, outside the parliament. That was it. And look at her now. She's got millions of followers. She's got a huge impact. So small things do get things rolling. If people can see where it's going and what it's doing, certainly, I'm all for that. I think what's happening here, though, that we've got a major issues that seemingly have very few solutions. And I brought up one of them, which is sand extraction. So this is around the world. It's not just in Tibet. This is around the world. The sand has to come from rivers to be viable for concrete. And now the solution to that is to maybe shift the concrete away from sand, maybe make it out of hemp or something else that doesn't need sand. And they've actually found now a process, I believe, where they can artificially create limestone. They don't have to actually use limestone because limestone has been desecrated, cut down all over the place too. They don't actually have to use, and this process of using limestone actually sucks CO2 out of the air, which is helping another problem, to make that limestone. So, you got to look at our process here. Concrete has a huge footprint across the planet. And if we can reduce that footprint, then we will solve another problem, which is sand. Because sand, I don't know if you're familiar with this problem, but it's sand is an essential element in keeping salt water at bay when it comes to crops, which I try to explain. In the Mekong Delta, for example, the sand is sediment that comes down the river and it builds up. And then mangroves build on that and so on. This blocks the salt water from coming in. But if you don't have that sand coming down as in the form of coarse sediment, then the salt water comes in. There is no plant, there's no crop on this planet that can survive heavy salt water. There's only mangroves, and even those to a limit, right? So there goes your crops. So now you've got a very serious problem, because if you don't have your crops, you don't have your food security. What are you going to do? You've got a major problem. So it looks like sand is just part of that problem, but then it snowballs into another problem, which is your food security, right? Hello.
Justin, are you with us?
I think Justin dropped out.
I think Justin dropped out again.
Yeah. So
I think, can you hear me, Michael?
I can hear you.
Dropping out.
Okay,
Yeah,
great. So
Justin's having dropout problems.
Yeah.
quite a bit
So
of
I guess it
language.
sort of falls to me to maybe wrap the thing up for this evening. I will rely on the technical people back in Hong Kong to pull the right switches. Okay. So anyway, thank you everybody for coming, and to those presenters who spoke tonight, thank you very much as well. I'm really looking forward to learning more from everybody tomorrow morning and afternoon. And I just want to say good night, unless anybody has any further things they want to throw at us. I'm not sure how long we're allowed to sort of stick around.
So I just want to say thank you for everybody for tuning in, and hopefully we can get this out to more people by recording. And
Yes.
and you know, if there's any kind of faith that's going to, you know, develop respect for nature, I believe it's Buddhism. It's ingrained in the faith. It's not actually a religion; it's more of a, you know, moral code anyway. So that's a good basis to start with.
Yeah, I'll just add that this all will be available online about a week after the conference, and then kind of spooling from there. So hopefully we will reach a broader audience with it.
Yep. Okay, John, thank you.
Tashidela.
That's really.
Thank you. So sorry about that. My internet connection has become unstable. I think it's just because of the time of day here. Everybody's flooding home, eating their dinner and watching TV or sucking up all of the...
It's the kids playing the video games. That's it.
Yeah. So sorry about that. I really appreciate your talk, Michael, and the advocacy and the work and education that you're doing. I look forward to this going online and hope that we can continue to discuss this matter. And as I've mentioned, like, talk about our successes. You're dealing with one of the biggest issues, I think, of anybody at this conference. You're really taking on something really big. And I think
But I don't have the solutions. That's the thing. The issues.
That's okay. Tell me who does.
I'll tell you who does. The people in Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and so on. Once China turns off the tap because there's no more water, you got 2 billion people there saying, excuse me, this affects me directly. It's not just something I'm reading in the newspaper. And then you're going to see some big changes.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Indeed, maybe. It depends on how much power they can exert at that time.
The government of Cambodia is terribly corrupt under the thumb of China. So anyway.
There's problems. And as I mentioned in my introduction, if the solutions were easy, our politicians would be doing them already. So I think we face political ineptitude all over the world, and that's why we're discussing this kind of as Buddhists and hoping to find Buddhist solutions as much as possible, or bringing our Buddhism into solving the problem, even if we admit in the end that maybe there is no solution. We're coming to the end, I think, of our time tonight, and I want to invite everybody to come back tomorrow. We'll have more discussion after the presentations and a little time at the very end for open discussion as well. Tomorrow's talks are going to talk about, maybe we don't have solutions. Maybe what we really see going forward is just continual destruction. And what does that mean? Like, what does that mean for our practice, for our spirituality? And what are we going to bring to that world, even if we can't solve these major issues? And as Buddhists, I think that's very much got to be part of our conversation, is what kind of person am I going to be in the time of environmental collapse, if that's indeed what comes in the next 10 or 20 years. Again, no easy solution. And I think it comes down back to practice, back to our hearts, back to, acknowledging the many emotions that this brings up, and hoping that we can move forward with as much wisdom as we can take in and as much compassion as we can hold and radiate out into this often very crazy world. So yeah, I'll double check to make sure our time. I kind of lost my bookmark about when we were gonna come to a conclusion. Sorry about that, everybody.
I think you're way over, right?
Yeah, closing. Oh, 7:20. I think we still have. Did we start it? Yeah. Yeah, I think we actually have a little more time. If anybody would like to. Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about corruption.
I think that last point you made, Justin, I think speaks to my heart, and that is, let's just say worst case scenario. You hope for the best, but you plan for the worst. There is no solution. We're screwed. But as a Buddhist, how are you going to be? How are you going to manifest in that, in this future that's coming? Because in fact, like I'm an old guy, right? So I'm not going to be around for that much longer. But a lot of other people are. I can see that, and a lot of animals are, and So I think the question is, we don't, living beings are numberless. I vow to save them all. Well, there's the dichotomy right there. You're not going to solve the corruption. You're not going to change human nature. We've already baked in too many problems. What are you going to do about it? You personally, tomorrow, what's your vow? So that's what I'm thinking these days.
Yeah.
Could I make a couple comments?
Please.
Yes. Is that Steve?
I've been kind of in this world for my whole life. I started doing environmental work in the mid 1960s and have been doing it ever since, and mostly in business context, but also in the nonprofit world. And to me, it's not at all that we don't have the solutions. It's just that we don't have the motivation. And because, the technology is there, the systems are there, the products are there to do things, but where people are just more captivated by their greed and their consumerism rather than, and one idea is that just things have to get bad enough to kind of stoke up that motivation. And I kind of have been waiting for that for the last 20 years or so. And it just sure seems like that's the case now. Things have definitely gotten bad enough. But I think the other problem is that when things get really bad, people get more stressed. And when people get more stressed, they kind of close up into this nationalistic blanket and can kind of even get worse. But one positive thing, one of the Karmapa's recent books, he was talking about this and how he thought one of the biggest problems for getting the motivation and getting people on board to really doing things that make a difference is because they're not connected to nature. So they don't appreciate nature. When people live in cities and they're just surrounded by concrete and asphalt and high buildings, they have such a little connection with anything that's natural and a plant. And I think that's a real key to that snowball effect that Mike was talking about possibly happening, is if people, even just like with a houseplant, if people have a houseplant or they grow a little herb garden in their backyard, anything to get your hands dirty and feel nature is kind of starts that momentum of appreciating it. And I think small things like that can evolve into these bigger scale things that need to happen and influences on governments. Because I think it's really a mistake to just put our hope in the large scale reaction, like a government, big government organizations, even if it's the UN or giant nonprofits. I think all those big movements have to start with a small scale and building up. And to me, I think the low-hanging fruit and what we can all do is start relating to nature, just growing something, doing a little bit of, even if it's just a house plant or two. And also, I read some articles when there was all that news last week about all the heat waves in Europe and all the people dying and record-breaking temperatures and everything. That in one of the articles, they had some footnotes to some scientific papers that made the correlation between ambient temperature and moisture in the soil. And there's a direct correlation that if there's more moisture in the soil, the temperatures come down. If there's less moisture in the soil, it gets hotter, and it creates this momentum. And because once the more of the moisture gets out of the soil, it gets hotter, so more moisture gets out, and that's kind of the heart motivation or process that creates desertification, and that momentum goes both negatively and positively. If we anything any of us do to just create a little bit more moisture in the soil, like growing a backyard garden, starts that process, and also kind of creates more of that appreciation and respect for nature that can develop and grow into a bigger movement that can at that point influence some of these larger organizations that have the impact to do something on a larger scale.
Yeah, thank you so much, Steve. I appreciate that. I mean, what I hear is very much what some of the other presenters have talked about, and that's going local and starting with where we're at. And like you mentioned, growing. I used to grow basil when I lived in a little flat in England, just to have a little bit of nature right there and something, beautiful and growing in my room. Yeah, a lot of people are being more and more disconnected from nature, and that's certainly a major problem. You also made me think of the recent movie, Don't Look Up, which I'm not sure if you've seen. It parodies our contemporary culture in the way that we try to gloss over major issues and ignore them on a very much a social level, with newscasters just kind of being glib and funny instead of like asking serious questions and giving these things the weight and gravitas that they deserve. And of course, politicians seeking nothing more than more donations in the next election. So societally, we do definitely have this kind of a Titanic ship. I think Michael pointed to that in one of his slides, like we're heading in a very bad direction, and societally, there doesn't seem to be good momentum for us. So it is really up to us to think about ways that we can, as individuals and beyond that, help change. Even if society continues to crumble, I think I keep coming back to that. What are we going to do? How are we going to behave in our homes, in our gardens, in our families, in our communities? What can we do while all this is happening?
In our Buddhist practice.
In our Buddhist practice, yes. Yes, we have a couple more minutes if anybody has any concluding thoughts. We have a question from the chat from Ramesh Andre, and he says, I'm a 30-year-old. I wish to do service on environmental issues and ethically using technology to serve beings, benefits. Please guide me how to promote what the Buddha taught and implement in the current Indian situation. Please guide. Any ideas you have for a 30-year-old, maybe with some tech knowledge in India?
Can I maybe address a little bit of that?
Yeah.
Let's come back to corruption. There's huge corruption going on in the terms of national parks, wildlife reserves, exploiting minerals and so on in India. And not just India, of course, China is even bigger. So you have to go at these people. You have to stop them from what they're doing. They're destroying whole environments because they want to throw up a dam. It's not just China, it's India. India is one of the biggest dam builders in the world. Nowhere near China, but still pretty big. So this corruption, you know, the making of dams, for example, involves concrete companies. They get the contracts from some minister. The minister slips a few dollars and, you know, it's all connected. So if we don't stop the corruption, then we can't really get at the bottom of the problem. But this is a very, very dangerous thing because people who are corrupt don't like to be exposed as being corrupt. And they'll go to any lengths to stop that.
Michael, I can't imagine Ramesh wants to become a protester who winds up going to jail and being very badly treated by his captors.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that in the press, writing about this or exposing it somehow, the journalists will do it. It has to come to the fore, because if you can't stop that corruption, you know you're working against forces that they're unstoppable. And you know it happens. I mean, it's a major force. I was talking before about Cambodia. Cambodia is building dams. China's building dams in Cambodia that's actually killing the fisheries there. So how's that happening? Because the Prime Minister Hun Sen is in bed with China. You know, he's taken directives.
So I'd like to hear from Ramesh. Give us a snapshot of what things are like in Hyderabad. Who's doing what?
If I can find him and unmute him. If you'd like to speak, Ramesh, let me see. I am not. You can't mute. Can you unmute
Ramesh,
yourself?
Do you want to unmute yourself and jump in?
There we go.
Hi.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you.
Morning, sir. Here in India, the meeting started in the morning 3 a.m.
Wow.
Good morning.
But this is a great opportunity for me and the great speakers and different messages. That's why I'm waiting for last week, this conference. Thank you, and
Thank you.
the major, sir, major issues here, environment issues and misuse political powers. Especially, I'm thinking about environment issues and also Greta Thunberg movement, Dalai Lama's speeches about environment issues, climate changing, and also I inspired that speeches. That's why I'm coming this conference, and great speakers are thoughts very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramesh. Yeah, maybe you will be the Greta Thunberg of India. I'm sure there are already a number of incredible environmental activists. I mean, Vandana Shiva has been mentioned.
Actually, they have a 12-year-old activist in India. Well, she's older now, but she started at 12.
Yeah, I thought of that as I said that. Like, I know there are probably a number of young people all over the world. I'm glad you brought that up, Michael, that you know, young people are probably going to be the ones that lead us and to a certain extent shame us for how little we've done. But Ramesh,
well, they can start with shaming their parents, and that usually works.
Yeah.
Start local.
I wonder what the Ambedkar Buddhists.
I think there's too much projection, though. You know, when we're talking about corruption and stuff, it's so easy to just project it to the outside and not see our own part in creating that. And I think, you know, we can't really change the big organizations or the outside of ourselves very much, but we can do something about our own activity and what we're doing. And I think, you know, the kind of the real foundation for a lot of the corruption is our own materialism, our own consumerism, you know, and so, you know, we can blame China for doing, you know, creating all these disasters in order to produce more products. But if we're the ones who buying those products, we're just as complicit in that as the manufacturers that are doing that. And I remember even 5 or 6 years ago, there was, you know, some statistic that if everyone in the world had the same lifestyle as the average person in America, it would take 4 planets just to provide enough natural resources. And I heard recently that even somebody was saying it's 6 now. So the main thing is, we can just project all the problem and the solutions to these big organizations or countries on the outside. But if we're kind of creating the demand that they're supplying, then
but who's creating the demand? Is it the corporations themselves that are creating the demand?
The Anthropocene overshoot day for planet Earth was 2 days ago, July 27th. 2 days ago, we used up all that we're supposed to use up this year. So, yes, I agree with you, Steve. We're at the bottom of it.
And that's why it's so hard, because the solutions are kind of going against the grain of the capitalistic religion that's taken over the world. And it's all based on consumerism and buying more and more, and the economy growing and growing. And the solutions are the opposite, having less products, less manufacturing. But the reason that's so hard to do is because there's economic consequences of that, like less jobs.
Well, it seems to me that's exactly what Buddhism is all about. It's like, this is exactly congruent with the Dharma to go in the other direction. And in that sense, Buddhist practice to me is radically disruptive. It's not fitting in with society at all. It's saying, no, that's samsara. Chuck the whole thing. Let's start from the bottom up again.
Yeah, and I think Gabriel mentioned that today, and I'll plug again tomorrow's program. A lot of our talks are going to be about, coming back to our practice, and our practice is radical simplicity, and that is a complete rejection of the go, do, buy society that we live in, the capitalist mentality. So if we can come back to our practice, reground ourselves in our heart, in our belly, and in our knowledge of our interconnectedness, then we kind of can go back out and live in a hopefully more simple way. And as Deepan mentioned earlier today, live and let live mentality. We do have such a consumeristic mentality, and I know I get drawn into that a lot, just from advertising and the world around us. And it's easy to just buy things and feel better for a minute or two. It's a lot more work, but I think as practitioners will all agree, it's a lot more satisfying to spend that 30 minutes on the cushion when you could be watching TV or mindlessly consuming something else. So we'll wrap up. We've got 1 or 2 more minutes, but I want to just again make a little plug for tomorrow and a plug for Buddhist practice, and starting ultra local and kind of working out from there. So with that, I want to thank you all so much for your talk, Michael and Steve and John and everybody who's been part of this today. That's all that's showing up on my Zoom screen at the moment, but we'll head out for now, and I wish you all a wonderful evening or morning as it may be in India. Thank you so much for starting with us at 3 a.m. That's inspiring. I'll just say that right now. Just the fact that you're up and you're doing this. Like, this is a major thing, and we need more of that. We need more young people and others like jumping in here and showing their enthusiasm, so that it's not just us older and oldish folk. So thank you so much, everybody.